Before we enter the darkness, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment with your country. We love seeing horror fans from around the world. Now let's begin. I have counted the islands in Crater Lake 4,211 times. There are 2 of them. Wizard Island in the Western Basin, a cinder cone with a crater of its own sitting inside the bigger crater like a joke the Earth told itself. Phantom Ship to the southeast, a spine of old rock that looks like the mast and rigging of a vessel that gave up on the ocean and came inland to die. 2. That is the number. Every map agrees. Every survey agrees. Every visitor who has ever stood at the Watchman Overlook with a paper brochure in their hands has counted the same 2 shapes. Counting them takes about 3 seconds. I do it every single time I reach the rim, before I do anything else, before I unlock a gate, or check a stake, or lift a radio. 3 seconds, twice a shift minimum, for 4 years now. 4,211 times, and I have written every countdown, because the 5th rule on the card says to keep a record. The card is what I want to tell you about. But I have to start earlier than the card, because if I hand you the rules first, you will do what I did, which is laugh, and I do not want you to laugh. I want you to understand why a grown adult stands in the wind at 6,000 feet in February and counts to 2 out loud like a child learning numbers, and why the number 2 has become the single most comforting sound in my life. I came to the park in the last week of October. I had driven up from Medford on Highway 62 in a truck with a bad heater and everything I owned in the bed under a tarp. And the drive took a little under 2 hours and felt like it took a season. The elevation climbs the whole way. You start in a valley full of pear orchards and gas stations, and you end in a forest of mountain hemlock where the trees stand so close together that the light between them turns the color of pond water. Somewhere around the Mazama Junction, the pavement went from gray to gray with white in the cracks, and I realized the white was not paint. Park headquarters sits at Munson Valley down below the rim, in a cluster of stone and timber buildings that were put up in the 1930s by men who clearly believed the buildings would still be standing when everyone who built them was gone. They were right. The stonework is enormous. The roofs are pitched at an angle that looks wrong until you see them under 14 feet of snow, and then it looks like the only sane angle a roof has ever been cut at. I parked at 7 in the morning, and there were 4 vehicles in the lot, all of them government white, with the arrowhead on the door. Nobody was outside. The air had that high, thin quality where every sound arrives with the edges filed off, and the only thing I could hear was the ticking of my engine cooling down, and far off the low grinding of a plow working somewhere I could not see. Inside the administration building, the lights were the old fluorescent kind, and they buzzed. A woman stood at the counter with a clipboard and a mug of something that had gone cold long enough ago that a skin had formed on it. She was somewhere in her 50s, silver coming in at the temples of hair that had been red once, and was now the color of dried brick, and she had a face that had spent 40 winters outdoors and had made its peace with that. "You are the new one," she said. She did not ask. "Adrian Vosk," I said. "Hollis Kepler." She put the clipboard down. "Where did they take you from?" "Fire crew, 3 seasons in the Sierra." "So you can dig?" "I can dig." "Good. That is about 60% of what you will do here between now and June." She reached under the counter and came up with a folded shirt in a plastic sleeve, the flat gray-green of the service, and she set it on the counter between us and slid it across with 2 fingers. "Try that. If the shoulders bind, tell me now, because the next one does not come until the spring order." I unfolded it. It was clean and pressed, and it smelled like the inside of a closed cabinet. There was a name tape sewn above the right pocket, and the name on it was not mine. Ash. I looked up. Hollis Kepler was watching me look, and she had the patient expression of someone who had known exactly what I would find and had been curious about the timing. "That comes off," she said. "I have a seam ripper in the desk." "Who is Ash?" "Corwin Ash. He had your position." She took the shirt back, turned it, and started working at the stitches with a small hooked blade, and she did it fast, the way you do a thing you have done many times. "He left in March." "Left for where?" The thread came away in a long white curl. She wound it around her finger and dropped it in the trash and did not answer. And that was the first moment in the park when I understood that a silence could be a full sentence. She gave me a locker, a radio, a key ring with 11 keys on it, and a housing assignment in the seasonal quarters at Sleepy Hollow, which is a row of small stone houses tucked into the trees below headquarters, and is much less charming than the name suggests. Then she said we would go up. Up means the rim. The road climbs out of the Munson Valley in a series of long turns through hemlock and fir. And the trees get shorter and more twisted the higher you go until they are not really trees anymore, so much as arguments the trees are having with the wind. The truck heater made a sound like a man clearing his throat. Kepler drove with one wrist over the wheel and said nothing for 11 minutes. Then the trees opened. I want to be careful here because I have heard people describe this and I have never heard anyone get it right, including me right now. Crater Lake is what is left after a mountain roughly 12,000 feet tall emptied itself out and fell into the hole it made. That happened about 7,700 years ago. The hole filled with snowmelt and rain, and only snowmelt and rain, because no rivers run into it, and no rivers run out. There is nothing in that water that came from anywhere except the sky. It is 1,943 feet deep. It is the deepest lake on this continent and the 9th deepest on the planet. And because there is nothing suspended in it, no silt, no runoff, no organic load worth measuring, sunlight goes down into it and keeps going, and every wavelength except one gets absorbed on the way. The one that comes back is blue. I am not describing a lake that is blue. I am describing a color that has decided to occupy a bowl 6 miles across. When the trees opened and I saw it for the first time, I made a sound, an involuntary one. The kind you make when cold water hits you. And Kepler did not comment, and I have since learned that she does not comment because everybody does it, and it would be cruel to point out. She pulled into the Watchman Overlook and put the truck in park and got out, and I got out, and the wind came over the rim and hit us both. Below us, the caldera dropped away in a wall of red and gray rock, and at the bottom of the wall, the blue started and did not stop. Kepler walked to the low stone wall. She put both hands on it. She looked out, and she counted. 1, she said. 2. Then she nodded once, small to herself, and turned around and went back to the truck. I stood there a second longer than I should have. And then I followed her, and I said, "What was that?" "Habit," she said. "That was not habit. You said it out loud." She started the engine. She let it run. She looked at me through the open window with an expression I could not read at all, and then she reached across to the glove compartment, opened it, and took out a card. It was laminated. It was about the size of a postcard, and the lamination had gone soft and cloudy at the corners, the way it does when something has been handled for years by people wearing gloves. There was typing on both sides. The typeface was the small, mechanical kind that came out of a machine with keys, not a printer. "Read this tonight," she said. "Read it all the way through before your first solo. Do not read it in front of anybody else, and do not photograph it." I took it. I turned it over. The heading on the front said, "In Capitals, Winter Operations, Rim District Internal." This is not in the handbook, I said. No, Kepler agreed. It is not. The seasonal quarters at Sleepy Hollow have thick stone walls and small windows, and they hold heat about as well as a bucket holds smoke. My unit had a bed, a table, a kitchenette with a 2-burner range, a wood stove that somebody had loved very much at some point in the past, and a smoke detector that chirped every 90 seconds because the battery was original to the building. I unpacked. I fixed the smoke detector. I made a pot of coffee that was terrible in a way I found comforting. And then, at about 9 at night, with the wind pushing on the window in slow gusts like something testing whether it was locked, I sat down at the table and took out the card. I am going to give you the rules exactly as they were printed. I have them memorized. I could recite them in my sleep, and according to one former partner of mine, I have actually done that. Here's what the card said. Winter Operations, Rim District, Internal. This document is not policy. Do not file it. Do not discuss it with visitors, seasonals in their first 2 weeks, or anyone from the regional office. 1. Count the islands at the start of every rim shift and at the end of every rim shift. Say the number out loud. There are 2. Log every count. 2. If you count 3, do not use the radio. Do not stop the vehicle to look again. Drive down to Munson Valley or out to the Mazama Junction and remain there until civil dawn. Log it the next morning. 3. Rim Drive is closed to all traffic, including staff, between 2 and 4 in the morning. If you are on it during those hours, keep moving at a steady speed and complete the loop. Do not reverse. Do not stop for a vehicle. Do not stop for a person in a service uniform, regardless of what they appear to be doing or how badly they appear to need help. 4. Read the snow stakes at dawn only. A stake read after sunset gives a number that will be wrong in a direction that matters. 5. There are 3 staffed radio positions in winter, designated 1, 2, and 3. If you hear traffic from Station 4, do not acknowledge it, do not repeat it, and do not write down what it says. If it uses your name, switch off the radio for 10 minutes. 6. Visitors may approach you at the overlooks after closing. Some of them will ask how old the lake is. Answer with a number. 7,700 years is correct and is what you should say. Never answer that you do not know. 7. Do not permit flash photography over the caldera between sunset and sunrise. If a visitor uses a flash, note the time, take them off the rim, and do not look at the water for 5 full minutes. 8. Cleetwood Cove Trail is closed after the first sustained snowfall. Do not descend it alone at any point in the winter season, even to the first switchback, even in daylight, even if you can see the whole trail from the top and it is empty. 9. If the surface of the lake is completely still, do not look for your own reflection and do not lean over the wall at any overlook. Still water on this lake is not normal and does not last long. Wait it out with your back to it. 10. If you find footwear at a trailhead with no owner present, photograph it, log the location, and leave it exactly where it is. Do not move it to the vehicle. Do not bring it inside a building. 11. When your relief arrives at the end of a night shift, before you hand over the radio, ask them the name of the cat that lives at the lodge. Everyone who works here knows the answer. If they do not know, or if they give a name that is not the correct one, do not hand over the radio. Drive down. Report it in the morning to the district ranger in person, not by radio. 12. If you break a rule on this card, you do not have to tell anyone. But write it down with the date in your own handwriting and keep it. You will want the date later. That was it. 12 lines on a card the size of a postcard, typed on a machine that probably had not existed since before I was born. laminated by somebody who cared enough to protect it and did not care enough to reprint it. I read it 3 times. Then I did what I imagine you would do, and what I am fairly sure every single person who has ever been handed that card has done, which is that I decided it was a joke. Not a mean one, a tradition. Every outfit I have ever worked has had something like it. On the fire crew, we told rookies that the 3rd day of a roll, you had to sleep with your boots pointed downhill or you would get shin splints, and they did it. And we let them do it for a week before anybody laughed. Ships have them. Kitchens have them. Any place where a group of people does something hard together for a long time will eventually grow a little tumor of ritual. And the ritual is how you find out whether the new person is going to be all right. Because the ones who fight it are usually the ones who fight everything. So I put the card in the drawer of the table, next to a church key and a dead flashlight, and I went to bed. And I want to be honest with you about what I felt. Because it was not fear. It was a kind of relief. I had come here to be alone in a place that made sense. A place with elevations and closures and stake readings in a lake with immeasurable depth. And being handed a piece of institutional folklore made the place feel warmer, not colder. It meant there were people here. It meant I had been let in on something. I slept better that night than I had in months. The first 2 weeks were work, and the work was good. October at the rim is long closing down. You winterize. You pull hoses and blow out lines and drain the comfort stations at Rim Village, and you go around every seasonal structure and put shutters on and check the roof loads and pull anything off the ground that snow will find and break. You drive a lot. Rim Drive is 33 miles around the caldera, and there are more than 30 overlooks on it. And every one of them has a wall and a sign and a trash receptacle and a drainage cut. And every one of them has to be looked at before the snow comes and hides all of it until June. I met the rest of the winter crew in pieces, the way you do. Boone Ochterberg ran the plow and had run the plow for 19 years and had a beard that had gone entirely white while the eyebrows above it stayed black, which gave him a permanently surprised look that his personality did not support at all. He spoke about 11 words a day, and 8 of them were about the machine. Rennie Sable worked dispatch out of Munson Valley, a woman about my age with a laugh you could hear through 2 closed doors, who kept a space heater under her desk that everybody knew about and nobody reported. Sig Malenko was the other seasonal, hired the same week I was. A wiry kid out of Nevada with a mustache he was too young for, in a habit of narrating his own actions out loud. Sig thought the card was hilarious. He had gotten one, too. He quoted it constantly. And there was Kepler, who was district ranger for the Rim in winter, and who I saw every day and learned almost nothing about. I did the counting. I want to be clear about that. From the very first solo, I did the counting, and I did it out loud, and I logged it. Not because I believed anything. Because it cost me 3 seconds, and it seemed to matter to Hollis Kepler. And I have generally found that when a person who has done a job for 4 decades asks you to do something that costs 3 seconds, you do it, and you save your arguing for something that costs more. 2. Every time. Wizard and the ship. There is a cat at the lodge, by the way. I asked on my 3rd day casually, because I did not want to be the person standing at a handoff at 4 a.m. realizing he did not know. Her name is Marmalade. She is enormous and orange, and she has lived in the lobby of Crater Lake Lodge for 11 years, and she has never once, according to the front desk staff, gone outside voluntarily. I wrote it on the back of my hand, and then I felt stupid, and washed it off, and then I wrote it in my notebook instead. The snow came on the 8th of November, and it did not really stop until May. That is not an exaggeration. It is a description of a normal year. Crater Lake gets something like 43 feet of snow annually. Not inches. Feet. The park has one road that stays open through the winter. The south entrance from Highway 62 up to the rim at Rim Village, and keeping that one road open is a full-time job for a small group of people and a very large amount of diesel. Everything else closes. The north entrance closes. Rim Drive closes to the public. The east side closes. By January, the park has a white bowl with a blue eye in the middle of it, and a single thin thread of plowed asphalt running up to the edge, and you can stand at Rim Village on a Tuesday in February and be the only person above 6,000 feet for a very long way in any direction. I loved it. I need you to understand that because of everything that comes after. I loved it immediately, and I love it now. There is a quality of silence up there that I have not found anywhere else, a silence with weight to it. And if you have ever needed to be somewhere that did not ask you any questions, then you already know why a person would drive 2 days and take a pay cut to stand in it. The first month of real winter, the strangeness was all small. The stakes, for instance. Rule 4. The snow stakes are tall marked poles, set in fixed locations, and you read the depth off them and log it. And the readings go into a record that goes back to 1931 and is one of the longer continuous snow records in the country. Kepler had said dawn only. So I read them at dawn, and it was a fine thing to do at dawn, driving out in the blue hour with a heater working and a thermos between my knees. One evening in late November, I was late getting back, and I passed the stake at the Discovery Point pullout at about 5:30, well after the sun had gone behind the west rim, and I stopped because I was there, and it was right in front of me, and it seemed idiotic to drive back out in 10 hours to look at a stick. The reading was 71 inches. I logged it. The next morning, out of some instinct I could not have justified, I drove back to the same stake at dawn. 59. 12 inches of snow does not leave in one night in November at 6,000 feet with no rain and a low of 19 degrees. It does not compact that much. It does not sublimate that much. I checked the stake for damage. I checked that I had read the right stake. I checked my own handwriting in the log twice, because the simplest answer was that I had written a 7 where I meant a 5, and I had not. I sat in the truck with the engine running for a while. Then I did the thing I want to tell you about, because it is the first real decision I made in this story, and I made it badly. I wrote down 59, crossed out the evening entry, and wrote in the margin, in small letters, evening red, disregard, and I did not tell anybody, and I did not write it on a separate paper with the date the way Rule 12 said to. I told myself it was an equipment issue. I told myself the light had been bad. Both of those things were reasonable, and neither of them was what I actually believed. And what I actually believed was that I had been handed a card with 12 strange sentences on it, and one of those sentences had just turned out to be about something real. And if I sat with that thought for too long, I was going to have to do something about it. So I put it down. People are very good at putting things down. It is possibly the thing we are best at. The radio came next. Winter dispatch at Crater Lake is quiet. There are long stretches where nothing goes across the air for an hour, and then somebody calls a plow position or a road status or a stake reading, and then it goes quiet again. You get used to the shape of it. You learn everybody's voice and everybody's rhythm, and the exact half-second of dead carrier before Rennie starts talking. And after a few weeks, you can tell who is on the air from the way they breathe before they speak. It was the 9th of December. I was parked at the Senat Memorial Overlook lot at about 11 at night, doing the last of a rim check, drinking coffee that had gone the temperature of a room. The radio said, "Station 4, radio check." I did not react at first because I was not listening properly. I was watching the caldera. There was no moon, and the lake was a hole in the world, a place where the stars did not go, and I was watching the line where the black of the water met the slightly less black of the rock, and thinking about nothing at all. Then my hand was already moving toward the microphone, because that is what your hand does, and I stopped it. Rule 5, 3 positions. 1, 2, 3. I sat with my hand 3 inches from the microphone, and I listened to the silence after the transmission. And the silence had a quality I did not like, because it was the specific silence of somebody waiting. And then it said, "Station 4, radio check, any station." The voice was ordinary. That is the part I have never been able to explain to anybody in a way that lands. There was nothing wrong with the voice. It was a man's voice, mid-range, calm, with the very slightly flattened delivery that people use on a radio because they are being careful to be understood. It sounded like every ranger I have ever worked with. Sounded like somebody's brother. Nobody answered it. That is the detail that got into me. In a park, with 4 people on the winter air, a radio check goes unanswered for maybe 8 seconds before somebody picks it up, if only to say, "Try again in the morning." This one sat there. Rennie did not answer it. Kepler did not answer it. Boone, who answered everything, did not answer it, which meant they had all heard it and all decided not to. I put the truck in gear and I drove down, and I did not switch the radio off because Rule 5 said to switch it off if it used my name, and it had not used my name, and I was still at the stage of this where I was following the card exactly and not 1 inch further, the way you follow directions to a place you do not believe exists. Halfway down the access road, it said, "Vosk, Station 4. I want to describe what happened in my chest, and I do not have the vocabulary. It was not a jump. It was a drop. It was the feeling of a floor that you had been standing on comfortably turning out to be a lid. I reached over and switched off the radio, and I drove the rest of the way to Munson Valley in a silence so complete that I could hear the tires changing pitch on the packed snow. And I sat in the lot with the engine off for a long time. Then I went inside and found Rennie Sable at the dispatch desk with her boots up and a paperback folded backward in one hand. "Anything on the air tonight?" I said. "Quiet as it gets." She did not look up. "Nothing around 2300? Rennie turned a page. She had a very good face for this. I would learn later that she had been doing it for 6 years and had gotten extremely good at exactly this moment. "Nope," she said. "Rennie." She marked her place with her thumb and looked at me over the top of the book. And for 1 second, just one, the pleasantness went out of her expression, and what was underneath it was something much older and much more tired. "Did you write it down?" she said. "No." "Good." She went back to the book. "Do not." I need to explain how rim drive works in the winter, because otherwise Rule 3 sounds like nothing. In the summer, rim drive is a 33-mile loop of 2-lane road around the top of the caldera, and it is one of the great drives in this country. And in July you will share it with motorcycles and rental campers and a man from Ohio who has stopped in the middle of the lane to photograph a marmot. In the winter, it is not a road. It is a suggestion under 20 feet of snow. The east half is not plowed at all. The west half from Rim Village out toward the Watchman is plowed intermittently when there is a reason, and the reason is usually a utility problem or a research team or a search. So a rule that says, "Do not drive rim drive between 2 and 4 in the morning" is most of the winter a rule about a road you could not drive if you wanted to. But there are windows, there are stretches in December, and again in March when the plow has been through, and the weather has held, and the road is genuinely open for a day or two. And in those windows, the winter crew uses it because there are structures out there and they have to be checked. The window came on the 21st of December, the shortest day of the year, and it stayed open for 3 days. And on the second of those days, I ran late. I had been out at the cloud cap area on the east side, well past where anybody had business being, checking a communications hut that had been throwing an intermittent fault. Boone had cut a lane out there for a contractor 2 days earlier, and the lane was holding. The fault turned out to be a rodent that had done a very thorough job on a bundle of low-voltage wire and had then, in a development I did not enjoy, died inside the conduit. By the time I had it patched enough to survive until spring, it was 1:15 in the morning. I remember sitting in the hut doorway with my headlamp off, letting my eyes adjust, doing the arithmetic. Cloud Cap sits at about 8,000 feet on the eastern rim. Getting back to Rim Village meant either driving the loop north and west, which was about 20 miles of plowed lane and would take me the better part of an hour in those conditions, or backtracking the way I had come, which was longer. Either way, I was going to be on Rim Drive between 2 and 4. I thought about it. I want you to know that I did think about it, sitting in a doorway at 8,000 feet with my breath freezing on my collar and the whole caldera below me, and that what I thought was this: it is a card in the glove compartment. It is a hazing ritual with a laminator. I have a truck with chains and a full tank and a radio and 31 years of experience being a person who does not panic. And I am not going to sleep in a communications hut because of Rule 3. But I also thought this, and I thought it in the same breath. Keep moving at a steady speed and complete the loop. Do not reverse. Do not stop. And I decided that if I was going to break the rule, I might as well follow the part of it that cost me nothing. So I went north and west, and I did not reverse, and I kept a steady speed. The first hour was ordinary and beautiful. The lane Boone had cut was a trench with walls higher than the truck in places, and driving it felt like driving a hallway. Where the walls dropped away, I could see out over the caldera, and there was a moon that night, a good one, 3/4 in high, and the lake took it and did something with it that I have never gotten used to. Moonlight on that water does not scatter. It sits. There was a single, long band of white lying across 1,900 feet of depth, and it did not move because there was no wind down in the bowl, and the effect was of looking at a photograph of a lake instead of a lake. At about 2:10 in the morning, I came around the long curve north of Lau Rock. There was a vehicle ahead of me. It was parked at the edge of the lane, angled slightly, the way you park when you have pulled off in a hurry. It was a service truck, white arrowhead on the door, the same model I was driving. Its parking lights were on. Its driver door was open, and the interior light was on, and the light was that particular weak yellow that a dome light gives out when the battery has been working on it for a while. There was a person standing at the front of the truck facing away from me, in a service parka with the hood down. I took my foot off the accelerator. I want to be extremely honest here. I did not think it was anything. My first thought, my absolute first thought, was that it was Boone, and that he had gone into the berm, and that he was standing there looking at his front end and deciding how much of an idiot he was going to feel like when he called it in. My second thought was that I did not know of any reason for Boone to be at Lau Rock at 2 in the morning. And my third thought was that there was no plow. A plow operator without a plow is a man standing in the snow. The truck kept moving because I had only lifted off and the gap closed to maybe 60 yards. The person at the front of the vehicle turned around. I have gone over this 1,000 times, and I can only tell you what I saw, which is a man in a service parka, medium build, hood down, hair short. He was too far away in that light for a face to mean anything. He raised one hand, palm out, at shoulder height. Not a wave. The other one. The one that means stop. And he stepped into the lane. My foot went toward the brake. It did. That is what a foot does. Somebody in a uniform in the middle of a closed road at 2 in the morning with his hand up is the single most legitimate reason to stop that exists in the work I do. And my body was ahead of my head, and the pedal was already coming up to meet my boot. And I heard Hollis Kepler's voice saying, "Do not stop for a person in a service uniform, regardless of what they appear to be doing or how badly they appear to need help." I put my foot back on the accelerator instead. I have replayed the next 11 seconds more than any other 11 seconds of my life. He did not move out of the way until I was very close. Close enough that the headlights were full on him and there was no ambiguity left about the uniform, which was correct in every detail: the parka, the belt, the boots, the radio clipped at the left shoulder, with the cord run under the arm the way we are taught to run it. His face I could see now, and his face was fine. That is the wrong word, and it is the only word. It was a face. It had all the parts. There was a man in his 30s with a slightly heavy jaw and a small scar through one eyebrow. And he looked at me through the windshield with an expression of complete, uncomplicated need. He looked like a person who had been standing in the cold for a long time and had finally seen headlights. At the last moment, he stepped back out of the lane, and I went past him at about 25 miles an hour. And as I went past, he turned to follow me with his head, and his hand was still up, and then the mirror. In the mirror, there was no truck. Not a truck with the lights off, not a truck partly around the curve. The lane behind me was an empty white trench with 2 lines of my own tire track in it running back into the night. And there was nothing standing in it, and there was nothing parked at the side of it. And the snow on the shoulder, where a vehicle would have had to pull off, was unbroken and smooth and had the little ripple pattern that wind leaves on a surface nothing has touched. I did not stop. I want credit for that. I did not stop, and I did not reverse. And I completed the loop. And I came around into Rim Village at 3:40 in the morning, going a steady 22 miles an hour with both hands on the wheel and my jaw aching from how hard I was holding it. And I did not look in the mirror again for 20 miles. At Rim Village, I pulled in behind the closed cafeteria building and put the truck in park and sat there. At 4:02 by the dash clock, I switched the radio on. I had switched it off somewhere around Cleetwood without remembering doing it. The air was empty. Just Carrier and the small electronic breathing of a system, but nobody talking on it. Then at 4:11, Hollis Kepler said, "Rim 1, 3. She had my call. I picked up. 3. "You are late." "Yes." There was a pause of about 4 seconds. On a radio, 4 seconds is a very long time. "You are on the ground at the village?" "Yes." Another pause. "Stay there until it gets light," Kepler said. I will bring coffee at 7. She did not ask me what had happened. She did not ask me why I was late. She did not ask me whether I had taken the loop. And when she came at 7 with 2 paper cups and got into my passenger seat and handed me one, she did not ask then either. She sat and drank her coffee and watched the sun come up over the east rim and put a line of pink across the top of Hillman Peak. And after about 10 minutes, she said, without turning her head, "Did you stop?" "No." Kepler let out a breath. It was a small sound, and she covered it well, and it was the single most frightening thing that had happened to me in the entire night, because it was relief, and relief means there was a version where I did stop, and it means she knows what that version looks like. "Good," she said. "If you have stayed with me this far, do me one favor before you keep going. Tap the like button. It is a small thing, and it costs you nothing, and it genuinely does help this channel stay alive. And honestly, at this hour, I would rather not feel like I am talking to an empty room." January was the quietest month. The road closed and reopened 4 times. Boone worked 11 and 12-hour days in a machine that vibrates hard enough to loosen your teeth over a season. The snowpack passed 140 inches at the Rim Village stake. The lake did not freeze because it almost never does, because there is so much water in that bowl holding so much summer heat that the surface can sit there at 35 degrees with a blizzard on top of it and simply refuse. I settled in. That is the strange part. After Llao Rock, I did not quit, and I did not fall apart. I did what people do, which is that I built a structure around the thing so I would not have to look directly at it. I told myself I had been tired. I told myself that 18 hours on shift at altitude does things to a person. I told myself that the mind is an organ that produces images the way a gland produces fluid, and that if you put it in a white trench at 2 in the morning, it will produce something to look at. And in the middle of the day, with the sun on the snow and Sig Malenko narrating his own shoveling from 40 feet away, that explanation held perfectly well. At night, it did not hold at all, but at night, I was usually inside. I kept counting. 2. Every rim shift, start and end out loud, logged. By the middle of January, the log had a few hundred entries in it, and every single one of them said the same thing, and the sameness had become genuinely soothing, like a stone you keep in a pocket. Sig had stopped counting somewhere in December. He told me so, cheerfully, while we were clearing a roof at the Steel Visitor Center. I gave it a solid month, he said. Month is fair. You give a superstition a month, and if it does not produce, you let it go. Kepler asked us to. Kepler asked us to. Kepler also asked me whether I know the cat's name, twice in a hallway, like a normal person. Sig drove the shovel in and levered a slab of snow off the edge and watched it fall. Marmalade. Marmalade. Man, I like her. I like her a lot. But that woman has been up here since before I was born, and something got into her at some point. And every single person on this crew is too polite to say so. He wiped his face with the back of his glove. Do you know what I think? I think a guy named Corwin Ash went out on the ice or off the rim or into a tree at 60, and everybody up here felt terrible about it, and instead of dealing with that, they wrote a card. I did not have an answer for that because it was genuinely good theory and because a part of me wanted very badly for it to be true. The third island happened on the 29th of January. It was a clear afternoon after 4 days of storm, one of those days that the winter gives you as an apology, with a sky the color of a gas flame and every branch loaded, and the light coming off the snowfields hard enough to hurt through polarized lenses. The road had opened at noon, and there were actually visitors, maybe a dozen vehicles, people who had watched the forecast and driven up from Klamath Falls and Medford to stand at the rim on the one good day. I was working the Rim Village area, which in winter means you are mostly a combination of information desk, first aid, and person who tells people not to go past the rope. The snow at Rim Village builds up so high that the wall along the rim disappears entirely under it. And what you get instead is a smooth white slope that runs from where people are standing straight down into the caldera at an angle that looks gentle and is not. Every winter, somewhere in the country, somebody dies because a snow slope looked gentle. We put up rope, we stand near the rope, that is the job. At about 3:40 in the afternoon, I walked out to the promontory to do my end of shift count, because I was going to be off at 4, and I did the count at the end of every rim shift. The light was low and gold and coming almost horizontally out of the west, and the caldera was half in shadow and half lit, and the water was that impossible blue with a band of copper across it where the sun was working. I said, 1. Wizard Island, black cone, snow in the crater at the top of it. The little dock at the eastern shore buried. I said 2. Phantom ship, small and gray and ragged, sitting in shadow near the southeast wall, exactly where it has sat for 7,000 years. And my mouth kept going and said 3. I did not decide to say it. This is the part I need you to hear, because it is the part that has stayed with me longer than the shape did. I did not see a third thing and then count it. My mouth said 3, while my eyes were still moving. The way your mouth says 4 when you are counting stairs and there are 4 stairs, and then my eyes arrived at the place where the 3 had come from. There was an island in the northern basin. It was maybe a third of the way from the north wall toward the center. It was long and low and black against the water, with what looked like a rise at one end, and it had snow on it, in patches, the same as the other 2, in the same pattern the wind makes. It threw a shadow. The shadow lay east of it, exactly as it should have with the sun where it was, and it was the correct length for something of that height at that hour. And I know that because I checked, standing there doing trigonometry in my head like a lunatic, because my brain had decided that if I could catch the shadow being wrong, then the whole thing would come apart and I could go have dinner. The shadow was right. The lake was 6 miles across and the island was 3 miles out, and it was, in every way I could measure from where I stood, an island. 2 things happened in me at the same time, and they happened in complete silence. The first was that my hand went to my radio, and I stopped it. And I stopped it fast. Faster than I have stopped my own hand doing anything in my life. Rule 2. Do not use the radio. The second was that I looked around at the other people on the promontory. There were 7 of them. A family with 2 kids in snow gear that had been bought that morning. 2 men in their 60s with tripods and the kind of camera equipment that cost more than my truck. A woman by herself in a red parka standing about 20 feet from me with a pair of binoculars. All of them were looking at the lake. None of them was reacting. That did not comfort me the way you might expect, because they were tourists, and a tourist looking at Crater Lake for the first time does not know how many islands there are supposed to be. They were looking at the most beautiful thing they had ever seen, and it had 3 islands in it. And why would that be wrong? I walked over to the woman in the red parka. I was very calm. I have been told that I get calm in a way that unsettles people, and I believe it. Beautiful afternoon, I said. It is unreal, she said. It does not look real. I keep thinking somebody painted it. Are those binoculars any good? She laughed and handed them over. Better than they need to be. They were my husband's. I put them up. I found Wizard Island first, and the optics were genuinely good. Enough that I could see the individual trees on the cone and the shape of the buried dock. Then I panned north. The 3rd island came into the circle, and it was clearer at magnification, and it was worse, because at that resolution I could see that it was not a shape. It had texture. It had rock faces on the west side with the lit and shadowed surfaces you would expect. And there was a line of vegetation on the top of it, hemlock or fir, the way the crown of Wizard Island has trees. And there was a place at the northern end where the water met the rock and made the pale ring that water makes. And there was something on it. Near the eastern shore of it, in the open, there was a small, pale rectangle, vertical. Perhaps, if the scale I was working from was right, and the island was a mile long, 5 or 6 feet tall, I looked at it for a very long time, and it did not move. Then the woman in the red parka said, "Do you see something out there?" And I lowered the binoculars, and I said, "No." And I gave them back to her, and I said, "You should head down before the light goes. The road gets slick fast after 4. And she thanked me and went to her car. I stayed until the last visitor left, because that is the job. And I did not look at the northern basin again while I was doing it. And when the lot was empty, I got into my truck and drove down to Munson Valley without using the radio and without stopping. And I sat in the lot there until civil dawn, exactly as the card said, which was a little over 15 hours. I did not sleep. I ran the engine for heat in 20-minute cycles, and I sat in a government truck in a parking lot at 6,000 feet in January. And at some point, around 2 in the morning, I took out my notebook and I wrote, in my own handwriting, with the date, the first entry in what would eventually be a very long list. January 29th. Counted 3 at Rim Village Promontory, 1540. Did not report by radio, did not look again. Object on eastern shore of Third Island, vertical, pale, stationary. I'm not able to say what it was. At dawn, I drove up. 2, I sat with my hands on the wheel and my forehead on my hands, and I said it again out loud to be sure. 2, Wizard and the ship, and 6 miles of empty blue where the northern basin was and had always been. Then I drove to the administration building, and I waited outside Hollis Kepler's office door for 40 minutes until she came in with her coat still on. And when she saw my face, she did not say good morning. She put her keys down on the desk, and she closed the door behind me, and she said, "How many?" 3. Kepler sat down slowly, the way people sit down when their body has stopped taking instructions for a second. "Did you radio it?" "No." "Did you drive down?" "Yes." "Did you look again after?" "No." She closed her eyes. When she opened them, there was something in her face that I had not seen there before, and would not see again for a long time, which was that she looked her age. "All right," she said. "Sit down, Vosk. It is time you knew about Corwin Ash." Hollis Kepler had a stone office with one window that looked out at a wall of snow. There was a photograph on the desk of a much younger version of her, standing next to a much older man in a service uniform, both of them squinting, both of them holding fish. There was a wooden case on the wall with a folded flag in it that she never explained and I never asked about. She got up and made coffee in a machine that took 4 minutes to do anything, and she did not talk while it ran, and I have thought since that she was using the time. Then she sat down and told me. "Corwin Ash came to us in 2020, she said. "Same position you are in, same quarters. He was a good hand. Better than good. He came off a search and rescue outfit in Colorado, and he had the temperament for winter, which most people do not. And after his first season, I put him up for permanent, and he got it. You liked him. I liked him a great deal." She turned her mug a quarter turn on the desk. He was 36. He had a sister in Bend. He read history, the big heavy kind with maps in it, and he could not cook at all, and he had a laugh that made you wanted to have said something funny. She stopped there for a second. "I gave him the card in October of 2020, she said. "I gave it to him the same way I gave it to you, in a truck, in the lot at the Watchman. And I told him what I told you, which is that it is not policy and that he should read it once before his first solo. And he did what you did, and what I did, and what every single person up here has done since 1951, which is that he decided it was a story. You did too?" "I broke 4 of them my first winter." Kepler said it flatly. "I read a stake at night. I answered Station 4. I picked up a pair of boots at the Pinnacle's trailhead and put them in the bed of my truck. And I looked for my reflection. I did not say anything." "I was 23, she said. "The man who gave me the card was named Ellis Whitcomb, and he had been here since the war, and he had a way of talking to young people that made you want to prove him wrong. So I proved him wrong 4 times in one season, and then I stopped, and I never broke another one. And I have been here 41 years. "What happened when you broke them?" Kepler looked at me for a while. "That is not the part that helps you," she said. "Ash is the part that helps you. So listen. She turned in her chair and looked at the wall of snow outside the window. Corwin followed the car for 2 full seasons. Never a problem. He counted, he logged, he stayed off the road at night, and when Station 4 came up on the air, which it did maybe 6 times a winter in those years, he sat on his hands and let it go by. And then in the 3rd winter, it started using his name. It used mine, I said. In December. I know. How do you know that? Because you switched your radio off for 10 minutes and I heard the carrier drop. And there is only one reason a person does that. She said it without any drama at all. It used his name, too, and here is what I need you to understand about that, Vosk, because it is the whole thing. It does not use your name to frighten you. It uses your name to start a relationship. The coffee machine ticked as it cooled. By January of that 3rd winter, it was calling him almost every night, Kepler said. And he stopped switching off. He told me later that he had reasoned it out, and the reasoning was very good. And I want to tell you the reasoning because you have the same kind of head he had, and you are going to build something similar sooner or later. Go ahead. He said, the rule says, do not acknowledge, do not repeat, do not write it down. The rule does not say, do not listen. And listening costs nothing. Because whatever it is, it cannot get anything from me unless I answer. So I will listen, and I will learn something, and I will be careful. That was, I am not going to lie to you, almost exactly the sentence that had been assembling itself in the back of my own skull for 6 weeks. What did it say to him? He would not tell me at first. Later, he told me some of it. It talked about his sister. It knew things about his sister, small thing, the kind of thing you would know about a person if you had listened to them being talked about for years. It talked about a fire road in Colorado where a search had gone badly in 2017 and 2 people had not come out. And it talked about that with a great deal of sympathy. Kepler's jaw moved. It was kind to him. That is what nobody expects. Everybody expects a voice on a radio at 2 in the morning to threaten them. It was kind to him for 11 weeks. And then it asked him for something small. She looked back at me. That is how it goes. It is always something small, and it is always something on the card. It asked him to read a stake in the evening. Why would it want that? I do not know. Kepler said it simply, and it was somehow worse than any explanation would have been. I have been here 41 years, and I do not know what it wants, or what it is, or whether want and is are even the right words. I know the pattern of it, because the card is the pattern, and the card is the pattern because 60 years of people wrote down what happened to them, and Ellis Whitcomb's predecessor typed it up on a machine in 1951. That is all the card is, Vosk. It is not a curse, and it is not a ritual. It is an accident report. I sat with that. So he read a stake at night, I said. He read a stake at night, and nothing happened, and that is the point. Nothing ever happens. If something happened when you broke a rule, nobody would ever break a second one. Kepler leaned forward. It went on for a month. It asked, and he did, and nothing happened, and each time the nothing made the next one easier. By the end of February, he had done 7 of the 12. Which 7? 4, 5, 10, 1, 3, 9. She stopped. And 8. Cleetwood. Cleetwood, Kepler said. On the 11th of March, at some point between 11 at night and 4 in the morning, Corwin Ash drove out to the Cleetwood Cove trailhead, alone in the middle of a closed season with 16 feet of snow on the ground, and he went down. Did you find him? We found his truck at the trailhead with the engine off and the keys in it. We found his radio on the seat. Switched off, we found his boots. The room was very quiet. At the trailhead, I said. At the trailhead, set side by side, laces tucked in, 6 feet from the driver door, on top of the snow. Kepler's voice did not change at all. It had snowed 2 inches after midnight that night. There was 2 inches of snow inside the boots, and none on the ground around them, and there were no tracks, and the search went 9 days with dogs and a helicopter and 40 people from 3 counties, and we did not find one other thing. Not a glove, not a fiber, 9 days. She picked up her mug and found it empty and put it back down. So when I hand a person a card in a truck, she said, and they look at me the way you looked at me, I let them look. Because there is no version of this where I convince you in October. Nobody has ever been convinced in October. You get convinced in January, standing on a promontory, counting to 3. I said, there was something on it, on the island. Something upright, pale. Near the water on the east side. Hollis Kepler was quiet for a long moment. Then she opened the bottom drawer of her desk and took out a folder, an ordinary manila folder, soft with age, and she set it on the desk and put one hand flat on top of it and did not open it. There is always something on it, she said, in every account since 1951. And I am going to tell you the only piece of advice I have that is worth anything. And then we are going to go do our jobs, because there is a roof at the Steel Center that has 11 feet on it and a forecast that does not care about either of us. All right? Do not try to find out what it is, Kepler said. Not with binoculars, not with a camera, not with a spotting scope, and above all, not by going down to the water. Every single person on this mountain who is still here is a person who did not try to find out. Every name in this folder is a person who did. She took her hand off the folder and slid it back into the drawer and closed it. And I never saw the inside of it. Not once. Not in 4 years. February is when the mountain stops being a place and becomes a condition. The storms come in off the Pacific in trains, one behind another with 9 or 10 hours of clearing between them, and the accumulation goes from impressive to absurd. By the second week, we were at 206 inches at the Rim Village stake. The seasonal quarters at Sleepy Hollow disappear under it. You walk out your door into a trench with walls above your head, and you follow the trench to your truck. And every few days, somebody has to go up on a ladder and dig out the stovepipes, because if you do not, people die of something that does not leave a mark. Boone Achterberg worked 19 days without a full day off in February. I helped him twice with a shear pin in weather that made my eyes freeze shut when I blinked. He said 41 words to me in those 2 days, and I counted them, because there was nothing else to count out there. The lake in February is a different animal from the lake in October. In summer, that water is a color you cannot believe. In February, under a low deck of cloud with snow coming sideways, it goes the flat gray of an old coin, and the wind puts a chop on it that you can see from 6,000 feet. And the whole caldera fills with moving weather so that some days you drive out to the rim, and there is no lake at all, only a bowl of cloud with wind coming out of it. And then there are the calm days. I need to explain about the calm because Rule 9 is about the calm, and until you have seen it, you will think that a still lake is a nice thing. Crater Lake is 6 miles wide and sits inside a rock bowl with walls that go up 2,000 feet. And those walls do something to air. There is essentially always wind on that water. The park has records going back most of a century, and the surface is in motion nearly all of the time, and even on the mildest August afternoon, there is a texture on it, a fine tremble, the way skin has texture. When it goes completely still, it does not look like calm water. It looks like the water has been replaced. I saw it for the first time on the 17th of February at about 4 in the afternoon from the Senate Memorial. The storm had gone through in the night, and the clearing behind it was total, no cloud from horizon to horizon, and the temperature had dropped to about 8 degrees, and there was no wind at all, not on the rim, not in the trees, nothing. I had been out for 6 hours. My face hurt. I walked out to the parapet with my count already forming in my mouth, and I stopped because the lake was a mirror. Not a metaphorical mirror, a mirror. The east wall of the caldera was in it, 2,000 feet of red and black rock and snowfield, upside down, with every detail present, every gully, every band of scoria, the exact texture of the snow on the ledges. The sky was in it. Wizard Island had a perfect twin hanging below it, point to point. There was not one ripple anywhere on 6 miles of surface. The line where the water met the rock at the base of the far wall had vanished entirely, so that the wall simply continued down into its own copy without any seam. And the effect was that the bottom of the world had come off, and I was standing at the edge of a shaft that went down 2,000 feet into a second sky. I said out loud, 1, 2. And every part of my body wanted to lean over the wall. This is the thing nobody warned me about, and the thing the card could not convey in the space it had. And I have thought about it since, and I do not think it is supernatural at all, or at least not the part I'm about to describe. When you stand at a height and look down at a perfect reflection, your inner ear and your eyes stop agreeing. There is no horizon. There is no surface. Your body has been calibrated by 400 million years of evolution to understand a thing called ground, and it cannot find one. And what it does in that situation is it leans forward to get more information. I felt myself do it. I felt my weight go onto the balls of my feet, and my hips come forward over the stone wall, and my hands go onto the top of the wall to brace, and my head start to go out over the edge. And every bit of that was ordinary human vertigo. And it was happening because I wanted to see where the water actually was. And then the second thing started. And the second thing was not ordinary. I wanted to see myself in it. I want to be as clear as I can. From the Senate Memorial parapet, the water is roughly 900 feet below and about a quarter of a mile out. There is no angle, no optics, no arrangement of the physical universe in which a person standing there could see their own reflection in that lake. It is not a question of stillness. It is a question of geometry. It is exactly as possible as seeing your reflection in the moon. I knew that. I have known that kind of thing since I was 9 years old. And it did not matter at all because the want was not coming from the part of me that knows things. It arrived fully formed in the same place where hunger arrives, and it said, "It is down there. Look for it. You are almost at the angle. Lean a little more." My hands were on the top of the wall. There was old snow on the wall, packed hard, and I remember the cold of it coming through the palms of my gloves, and I remember that my right boot had come up onto the toe. And then, from about 40 feet behind me, Sig Malenko said, "Vosk. Hey, Vosk." I came back into my body all at once, the way you do when you fall asleep sitting up and jerk awake. I turned around. My legs were not good. I got about half of my weight onto the wall behind me and stood there breathing. Sig was standing at the top of the steps with a shovel over his shoulder and an expression I had never seen on him, which was fear with nothing funny anywhere near it. "Do not," I said. My voice came out wrong. I tried again. "Do not come out here." I was not going to. He had not moved from the top step. "Man, you were out over that wall about 1.5 feet. How long was I standing here?" Sig hesitated. "I came up at 3:50, he said. "It is 4:20. 30 minutes. I had walked out to the parapet, said two, and lost half an hour standing at the edge of a 900-foot drop, leaning forward. We went back to the vehicles together. Neither of us said much. At the trucks, Sig stopped with his hand on the door and looked back toward the rim, and the light was going gold, and the whole caldera was still doing it. That flat, impossible mirror, and it was, I want to be honest, one of the most beautiful things I have ever seen in my life. Rule 9, Sig said. Rule 9. I have been telling everybody that card is a joke since November. I know. He got in his truck. Then he rolled the window down. It is not the lake, he said. Right? It is a vestibular thing. No horizon. Pilots get it over water. There is a whole term for it. Yes, I said. There is. So it is a real physical phenomenon. And the card is just old people describing a real physical phenomenon badly. Sig. What? When you called my name, I said. What was I doing with my hands? He stopped. You were reaching, he said. Down. Like you were going to pick something up off the water. We drove down in convoy, and that night I wrote the second entry in my notebook. And it took me 3 tries to write it because I kept having to stop. February 17th. Senate Parapet, 1550 to 1620. Water fully still. Did not look for reflection deliberately. Lost approximately 30 minutes. Was reaching. Sigmalenko interrupted. Rule 9 is not about vertigo. I want to put one more thing in this chapter, because it is the thing that has aged worst. When I stood up from that notebook, I went and stood in my kitchenette and drank a glass of water and looked at nothing, and I noticed that under the fear there was something else. And the something else was disappointment. Some part of me had been 30 seconds away from something and had been interrupted, and that part of me was sulking about it like a child. I have never told anybody that until right now. Rule 6 was the one I had thought about least, because it was the one that sounded most like a party trick. Somebody asks you how old the lake is. You say 7,700 years. Fine. That is not a rule. That is a job description. I said that number 400 times a season at the summer overlooks before I ever came to winter. It is on the sign. It is in the film at the visitor center. A child can tell you. Here is what the rule is actually about, and I did not understand it until the 4th of March. The road was open. It had been open for 6 days, which was the longest stretch of the winter, and there had been a run of clear weather, and the park had that peculiar late-season crowd you get in March, people in ski gear and snowshoes, a handful of overnight backcountry permits, a bus of high school students from Roseburg. I was closing the Rim Village area at dusk. That is a specific routine. You sweep the promontory, you check the warming hut. You make sure nobody has decided to build snow cave. You count the vehicles in the lot against the permits, and you push everybody down before full night, because the road ices after the sun leaves the west wall. At about 6:40, with the lot down to my own truck and the light going that deep blue that is not evening and is not yet night, I did my final walk out to the rim. There was a man standing at the edge of the promontory. He had come from somewhere. That is the flat and unhelpful truth of it. The lot was empty. There were no tracks in the fresh 2 inches that had come down that afternoon except mine. And I had walked out and back twice, and the third set of tracks that should have been his were not there. And I noticed that immediately, and my body went cold, and my voice came out completely normal because I am good at that. Evening, I said. I have to close the area up. He turned around. He was maybe 60. He wore a canvas coat, the old waxed kind, and no hat, and no gloves, and his hands were bare and hanging at his sides, and he had been standing out in 8 degrees with the wind coming up the wall for however long a person can stand there. His face was pleasant. That word again. It was a pleasant, mild, entirely unmemorable face, and I have never once been able to picture it since, though I can picture the coat perfectly. Of course, he said. I have taken too long. Are you parked below? I came up, he said, which is not an answer, and he said it while looking past me at the lake. I should have taken him down. I know that. Every part of my training says that when you find a person at dusk in February in a canvas coat with no gloves, you get them into a heated vehicle, and you get their name, and you call it in. What I said instead was, "Big day. Water was still this morning." It gets like that, he said. Then he said, "How old is it?" And every hair on my body stood up. He said it the way you ask about a building. Casual, mildly curious, a little bored. He did not turn around when he said it, and I want to tell you exactly what happened in my head in the second and a half that followed, because it is the entire reason that rule is on the card. What happened is that I did not know the answer. I knew the answer. I had said the answer that afternoon to a school group. 7,700 years, the eruption of Mount Mazama, one of the largest in the Cascades in the last 10,000 years. Ash from it turns up in cores across 8 states and in Canada. That is not a fact I hold loosely. It is riveted to me. And standing on that promontory with that man in front of me, my mind went out from under the number. It was not forgetting. I want to be precise. It was the sensation of reaching for a thing you have held 10,000 times and finding that your hand goes through it. The number was there. I could see it. In the way you see a word you cannot say. And around it, in that second and a half, an enormous quantity of other information arrived, and the other information was that I did not actually know when the mountain fell. That nobody knew. That 7,700 is a figure produced by a method. And the method has assumptions, and the assumptions were made by people, and people are only people. And the lake had been sitting in that hole while every one of those people was born and died. And how old is it, really? How old is it? And how could a person standing on a rim in the failing light possibly say? That is what the rule is protecting you from. It is not protecting you from him. It is protecting you from the answer you are about to give. I heard my own voice say, 7,700 years. The man was quiet for a moment. That is what they say, he said. That is what the ash says. It is in the soil in Alberta. He said. And then he walked past me, and he walked across the promontory and up the slope toward the lot, and I turned to watch him go, and he went around the corner of the closed cafeteria building, and by the time I got there, maybe 11 seconds later, there was nothing behind the building but a smooth 2 inches of new snow with no marks in it of any kind. I got in my truck. My hands were shaking so badly that it took me 2 tries to get the key in, which is not something that happens to me. And here is the part I have thought about most since. On the drive down, I found that I was furious. Not frightened. Furious in a hot, childish way. And it took me most of the descent to work out what I was furious about, and it was this. I had wanted to say, I do not know. The true answer, the honest answer, the answer that a careful person gives, was that I do not know how old the lake is, and that nobody does. And the 7,700 is a good estimate produced by good methods, and is still an estimate. Every part of me that has ever loved being right wanted to say that. It would have been the more accurate sentence. The card says never answer that you do not know. I asked Kepler about it 2 days later in the equipment bay while we were pulling chains. You gave the number, she said. I gave the number. Then that is the end of it. She threw a chain into the bin. Do not think about it too hard, Vosk. That is not me being mystical. That is operational advice. The thinking is the hook. I want to know what happens if you say you do not know. Hollis Kepler straightened up and put her hands in the small of her back, and she looked at me across the bay for a long moment. Alice Whitcomb told me a story once, she said, about a man named Peel, worked here in the 50s before the card. Said Peel was asked the question at Discovery Point and said he did not know, and said that the fellow who asked it seemed pleased about that and told Peel a number instead. What number? Whitcomb never said. He said the number was not the point. He said the point is that Peel believed it. She picked up the next chain, and that he spent the last 11 years of his life trying to prove it, and that he was not a well man at the end, and that they found a great deal of paper in his house. That is not really an answer. No, Kepler agreed. It is a warning shaped like an anecdote. That is most of what I have got. You want an answer, and I have been here 41 years, and the honest position is that the card is a list of things that went wrong for people, and the shortest sentence we could write about how to not have them go wrong for you. Nobody up here understands it. We just live in it, like weather. She hauled the bin door down. You will notice, she said, that the card never explains a single rule. Whitcomb told me that was deliberate. He said the man who typed it had written explanations first and then took them out. Why? Because an explanation is a thing you can argue with, Kepler said. And a person who argues with it always wins the argument. I'm going to tell this chapter as plainly as I can because it is the one I have the least distance from, and because if I decorate it at all, I will not get through it. Sigmalenko changed after the 17th of February. Not the way you might think. He did not get quiet or scared. He got hungry. He had spent 4 months treating the card as a joke. And then he had stood at the top of the steps at the Senate Memorial and watched a man he liked reach for a lake 900 feet below, and something in that had turned over in him. And what came out the other side was not fear at all. It was curiosity, and it was the very worst kind, the kind that has a grievance in it. They are not going to tell us anything, he said to me in the break room in the first week of March. You realize that? Kepler tells you a story about a dead guy and calls it an explanation, and you say thank you. That is not information. That is a bedtime story with a moral. She has been here 41 years. 41 years of not asking. He had a spoon and a cup of instant soup, and he pointed at me with the spoon. You know what the card is? It is a list of the 12 places where you could actually find something out. That is not a coincidence. Every rule is a door with a sign on it. I told him he sounded like a man building himself a reason. He told me I sounded like a man who had almost gone over a wall. We were both right, and that is why the conversation went badly, and we did not talk much for about 10 days. What I know about what Sig did after that comes from 3 sources. His own logbook, which was in his truck, a conversation we had on the 16th of March that I have gone over so many times I no longer trust my memory of it, and one other thing that I will get to at the end of this chapter. He started with Rule 10. There is a set of boots that appears at trailheads in this park. I had not seen a pair yet at that point. They are described in the incident record going back decades, and the description is consistent to a degree that ought to be impossible. Work boots, leather well used, laces tucked into the tops, set side by side and squared up, as if by somebody who cared about how they looked. They turn up at Cleetwood Cove, at the Pinnacles, at the Lightning Springs trailhead, at Pumice Point. They turn up in every season. Sometimes they are wet inside. The rule says photograph, log, leave them. Sig found a pair at Pumice Point on the 11th of March, and he put them in the bed of his truck, and he drove them down to Sleepy Hollow, and he put them on the floor of his kitchenette next to the wood stove. He told me this himself on the 16th in the middle of an argument, as a kind of victory. 5 days, he said. 5 days, and they are just boots, size 10.5. Vibram sole, worn on the outside edge, guy pronated. There is a name written in the tongue of the left one in the ball point, and it is faded, and I cannot read it, and that is the single most interesting thing about them. Take them back. To what? To a pile of snow at a pullout? Take them back to where you found them, Sig. Vosk. He was not shouting. That is the thing I remember, that he was completely reasonable. In 5 days, nothing has happened. That is data. That is more actual data about this than anything anybody up here has said to me all winter. Do you understand what I am offering to do? I am offering to be the guy who finds out, I said. And I have thought about this sentence every day since. Nobody is asking you to be that guy. And Sig said, somebody is. I did not catch it. I want you to know that I did not catch it, standing right there, 4 feet from him, with everything I already knew. He said somebody is, and I heard it as a figure of speech, as him saying that the situation demanded it. And I let it go past me, and I got in my truck and drove up to the rim to do a stake reading at dawn. He meant the radio. It had been talking to him since the end of February. It is in his logbook, which is a spiral notebook with a bent cover. And the entries start ordinary and stay ordinary for a long time, times and depths and vehicle counts. And then in the last third, they begin to have a second kind of entry mixed in, written smaller, in the margins, always with a time and never with a date. I have read that notebook exactly once. Kepler let me in her office with the door closed in April. I am not going to repeat what is in it. I want to be very clear that this is a decision and not a dramatic gesture. Rule 5 says do not repeat it and do not write it down. And I have kept every rule on that card for 4 years except the ones I am going to tell you about. And repeating what a voice said to a dead man is not going to be one of them. What I will tell you is the shape. It was kind to him, exactly as Kepler had said. It sympathized with him about being new and about not being taken seriously. It agreed with him that the card was a way of not thinking. It was funny once or twice, and the funny entries are the ones I had to stop reading at. And it asked him for small things, a steak read after sunset on the 2nd of March, a pair of boots moved on the 11th. On the 14th, it asked him to drive Rim Drive between 2 and 4, and he did. And the entry for that night is 4 words long, and the 4 words are, nothing happened. Told you. And on the 17th of March, at 9:40 at night, it asked him whether he wanted to know what was on the 3rd island. He wrote down that he did. The last entry in the notebook is at 10:20 in the evening on the 17th of March, and it says, going down to look, back by 2. Tell Vosk he was wrong about the reaching. Cleetwood Cove Trail is the only place in the park where a person is legally allowed to walk from the rim down to the water. It is 1.1 miles long, and it drops 700 feet, and it is a series of switchbacks cut into a slope of loose volcanic rock. In summer, it is a hard hike back up, and people underestimate it every single day. In March, it is not a trail. It is a chute of snow at an angle, above a drop, with a lake at the bottom that is 38 degrees and 1,900 feet deep and has no shallow edge anywhere, no beach, no shelf, nothing you can stand on. If you go into that water in March, you have about 10 minutes of useful movement, and there is nowhere to go. I got the call at 4:15 in the morning on the 18th from Rennie Sable, who had noticed that Sig had not checked off shift and had not answered. and who did not follow the ordinary escalation procedure at all, and instead called Hollis Kepler at home, and then called me. We found his truck at the Cleetwood trailhead at 5:50. The engine was off, the keys were in it. His radio was on the passenger seat, switched off or tore. His boots were on the snow beside the driver door, side by side, squared up, laces tucked into the tops. And about 4 feet from them, set the same way, facing the same direction, there was a second pair, older, leather, worn on the outside edge of the sole. The search ran 11 days. 2 counties, the sheriff's dive team out of Klamath, dogs, a helicopter out of Medford. For the 3 days the weather allowed one. They put a remote vehicle in the water off Cleetwood and ran it for a week. I worked all 11 days, and I slept about 9 hours total across them. And I am told that I was very calm and very useful. We did not find one other thing. Not a glove, not a fiber. On the 9th day, standing at the trailhead in a whiteout with the search winding down around me, I did something that I logged that night and have never regretted and would not do again. I went down. Not far. 4 switchbacks, maybe 200 feet of descent, kicking steps in old snow with a shovel for a self-arrest tool, because I did not want anybody to hear me pull an axe off the rack, alone, in a closed season. Rule 8. All the way through, no ambiguity, in daylight, in a whiteout, with 40 searchers 100 yards above me on the rim who would have stopped me in a second if the visibility had been better. I want to tell you I did it because I thought he might be alive. That is what I put in the report. What I actually did at the 4th switchback, where the slope steepens and the snow gets that hollow feel over rock, is that I stopped and I stood in the whiteout and I said his name once, not loudly, and then I stood there in the total gray with no up and no down and no horizon, and I listened. And out on the water, a very long way out, much further than the shoreline could possibly have been in that visibility, somebody answered me. They used my first name. I went back up that slope faster than I have ever moved on snow in my life. I fell twice. I came over the top into the whiteout at the trailhead and walked directly into Hollis Kepler, who took one look at my face and did not ask me a single question, and turned me around by the shoulder and walked me to a truck and put me in it and closed the door. Later that night she came and found me and sat down across from me and said only this, whatever it said, whatever it sounded like. Write it down with the date. Keep the paper, and do not tell me, and do not tell anybody else, ever. Why not? Because it is not a message, Vosk. It is a hook with bait on it, and if you hand the bait to somebody else, you have not gotten rid of it. You have just made a second hook. The park closed the position for the rest of that season. They do that. There is a whole apparatus that comes up the mountain after an event like that, people from the regional office in press shirts who have never read a snow stake in their lives. And they are not unkind, and they are not stupid, and they filled out a great deal of paper. And the paper said that a seasonal employee had entered a closed area alone at night in winter conditions and had most probably entered the water. And the paper was correct in every particular and explained nothing. I stayed. I do not have a good reason for that, and I have stopped offering people bad ones. Kepler did not ask me to stay, and she did not ask me to leave. What she did on the 1st of April was hand me a new card. It was not laminated yet. It was typed on the same machine which lives in a cabinet in the administration building, and which she maintains herself with a ribbon she orders from a company in Ohio that I did not know still existed. There was a 13th line on it. 13. If a person on this crew begins to tell you that the rules are doors, take their radio and drive them down that night. Do not wait for the end of shift. Do not discuss it with them. You will not talk them out of it, and every hour you spend trying is an hour they are being talked to. I read it about 9 times. "When did you write that?" I said. "The 20th of March. 2 days after?" "2 days after." Kepler took the card back and squared it on the desk. Whitcomb added 2. The man before him added 5. There were 7 rules in 1951, and there are 13 now, and I am not proud of a single one of the ones I put on there, because every one of them is a person. I asked her the question I had been carrying since January. Why does anybody stay? Hollis Kepler thought about it properly. That was one of the best things about her. She never gave you the fast answer if the fast answer was not the true one. "Because it is not hunting us," she said finally. "That is the whole of it, Vosk. In 41 years, I have never once seen it take a person who did not walk toward it. Not one. It does not come into the buildings. It does not come down to Munson Valley. It never touched a visitor. In 4 decades, I have not lost a single member of the public to this, and I have lost 3 of my own. And every one of the 3 went out to meet it, with their own keys in their own hand. That is a fine distinction to make about something that kills people. It is the only distinction there is." She shrugged. And it was not a callous shrug. It was a very tired one. "There is a thing in this lake, or under it, or of it, and I do not know what it is, and it is patient in a way that I do not think has anything to do with us. And it wants to be found. That is all I have ever been able to work out about it. It does not want to find us. It wants to be found. And it will spend 11 weeks being kind to a lonely man on a radio in order to be found by him. So the card is not protection. The card is a list of the doors," Kepler said. "Sig had that exactly right, and he thought he was disagreeing with me. It is a list of the doors, and the entire point of the list is so that you know what a door looks like when you are standing in front of one at 4 in the morning, and it has been kind to you for a month. Now let me tell you about Rule 11, because it is the last of them that I broke, and because it is the one that changed how I live. The 11th rule is the handoff. When your relief comes at the end of a night shift, before you give up the radio, you ask them the name of the cat that lives at the lodge. Marmalade, everybody knows. It is the most trivial question in the world, and it is the one I now ask with more attention than I give to anything else in my life. The second winter, in December, I was on a night at Rim Village, and my relief was due at 6. Headlights came up the access road at 5:50. A service truck pulled in beside me, and a person in a service parka got out and came around, and the light was bad, and the wind was up, and there was blowing snow coming across the lot in sheets, and I put my window down. "You are early," I said. "Roads were good." "Cat's name?" There was a pause. It was not a long pause. It was maybe a second and a quarter. It was exactly the length of pause a person makes when they are cold and tired and have been asked a stupid question at 6 in the morning for the 40th time. And I have made that pause myself 100 times, and I want to be honest with you that if I had not seen what a second and a quarter can cost, I would have laughed and handed over the radio. "Marmalade," the person said. And I gave them the radio, and I said, "Have a good one," and I drove down. It was Rennie's cousin, doing a covering shift, a perfectly ordinary man named Dell who had been on the mountain 4 times that season, and who did, in fact, know the cat's name, and who told Rennie afterward that the new guy up at the village was intense. Nothing happened. Nothing was ever going to happen. It was a man in a parka in a snowstorm at 6 in the morning. I drove all the way down to Munson Valley with my heart going hard enough that I could feel it in my teeth. And I sat in the lot, and I understood something that I think is the actual moral of everything I have told you. The rule is not there because a wrong answer means something is standing in the parking lot wearing a person. The rule is there because asking makes you look. For 4 years, I have asked that question at every handoff in every weather, to people I have known for a decade, to Boone Achterberg, to Hollis Kepler herself, and every single time I have asked it, I have had to actually stop and look at the human being in front of me, at their face, at their hands, at the way they are standing, and make a decision about them. That is the whole of what the card does. 12 sentences, now 13, and not one of them explains anything, and every one of them takes something you would do automatically and forces you to do it on purpose. Count the islands, look at the lake, read the stakes at dawn, look at the light. Do not stop for a person in a uniform. Look at who is in the road. Ask the cat's name. Look at your relief. It is not a spell. It is a set of instructions for staying awake in a place that would very much prefer that you did not. Hollis Kepler retired in the spring of my 3rd year. There was a thing in the community hall at Munson Valley with a sheet cake and a plaque, and about 60 people, and Boone Achterberg stood up and spoke for 2 full minutes, which is more words than he had said in the previous 11 months, and by the end of it, half the room was wrecked. She left on a Tuesday. I carried a box out to her vehicle and put it in the back and closed the hatch, and she stood there with her hands in her pockets in a jacket with no arrowhead on it, and it looked wrong on her in a way I could not stop noticing. "You are district ranger for the Rim in October," she said. "I know. You know what that means. It means I hand out the card. It means you write on it, if you have to." She looked up at the ridge, at the trees, at the enormous blue sky over the caldera, that you cannot see from Munson Valley, but that you always know is there. Try very hard not to have to. Hollis. 41 years, I said. You broke 4 of them your first winter, and you never told me what happened. And Hollis Kepler smiled, which she almost never did, and she got into her vehicle and started it. And she rolled the window down and said, "That is right." And then she drove down the mountain, and I have had 2 postcards from her since, both from the coast, both about birds. So that is where I am. I am the one who hands out the card now. I did it for the first time last October in a truck in the lot at the Watchman Overlook, to a young woman named Priya Raghunath, who came off 4 seasons in Denali, and who is better in weather than I was at her age. I gave her the card, and I told her it was not policy and that she should read it before her first solo. And I watched her face do exactly what my face did, which was to decide that I was a slightly sad man participating in a tradition. I let her decide that. Nobody has ever been convinced in October. Then I got out and walked to the wall and counted out loud, 1, 2, and got back in the truck. And she looked at me sideways the whole way down. She asked me 2 weeks ago about Station 4. She asked casually, the way you ask a question you have already spent 3 nights on. She wanted to know whether it is a real transmitter, whether somebody has ever tried to direction find it, whether the park has ever put a recorder on the frequency. I told her the truth, which is that in 1986 they did put a recorder on it for a full season at the request of a communications specialist from the regional office who was extremely thorough and extremely patient. She asked what was on the tapes. I told her the truth about that too, which is that the tapes have carrier and hiss and in the ordinary traffic of a small mountain park in winter, and that in the places where 4 people standing in a room remember hearing a voice, there is nothing on the tape at all. Not a voice, not a silence with a shape, nothing. And Priya said, "So it is not on the air?" And I said, "No." And she said, "That, and then where is it?" And I said, "That is the question that killed a man I liked." And she stopped, and she has not brought it up again. And I do not for 1 second believe that she has stopped thinking about it, because I never did. The counting is the part I want to leave you with. 4,211 counts over 4 winters and 3 summers. The log is in a green ledger in the bottom drawer of a stone office at Munson Valley, and it is the least interesting document ever produced by a public employee, and I would not trade it for anything I own. 4,209 of those counts say 2. The 29th of January of my first year says 3. And there is one more. It happened last month, the 11th of June, 4:50 in the morning, at Discovery Point, on a summer dawn with no wind and the sky going the color of the inside of a shell. I walked to the wall. I said 1, and I said 2, and my mouth stopped. And I stood there, and I looked at 6 miles of blue with 2 islands in it, and there was nothing wrong at all, and I understood, standing there, that what had stopped me was not something I had seen. There was a pressure on the count. That is the only way I have ever been able to put it. It was the feeling of a word being on the tip of your tongue, except that the word was a number, and the number was waiting to be said, and it would have been so easy to say it, easier than not saying it. The way it is easier to go down a hill than to stand on it, I did not say it. I got in my truck. I drove down to Munson Valley, and I sat in the lot until the sun was properly up, and the shuttle driver started arriving, and then I went in and wrote it in the ledger. June 11th, 0450, Discovery Point, 2. Wanted to be 3. That is the entry. That is number 4,211. I do not know what is in that water. I have stopped needing to. There is a version of me that would have found that unbearable 4 years ago, a version that would have said that a person with a mind ought to use it, that a rule you cannot explain is a superstition, that the difference between us and every other animal on this mountain is that we go and look. That version of me is the one who leaned out over the wall at the Sinnott Memorial reaching for his own reflection, 900 feet below, and he would have gone over, and the only reason he did not is that a 26-year-old kid from Nevada happened to come up the steps with a shovel. And then that kid went down to the water 11 months later in his socks because something spent 3 weeks being kind to him on a radio. So here is what I have got. Not advice, just what I have got. If you ever come up here, come in July, when the road is open all the way around, and there are 800 cars and a line at the ice cream counter at Rim Village, and the whole thing is safe and loud and full of families. Stand at the wall. Look at the most beautiful thing in the state of Oregon. Take the boat out to Wizard Island and climb the cone and look back at the rim and feel very small in the good way. And if you happen to notice while you are standing there that the ranger in the flat hat who is answering a question about the depth of the lake glances out at the water first and moves his lips for a second before he answers you, do not think anything of it. He is just counting. He is always just counting. And on the day he counts 3, he is going to get in a truck and drive down this mountain without touching his radio, and he is going to sit in a parking lot until the sun comes up, and in the morning he is going to write it in a green ledger and go back to work. That is the job. That is all of it. 2. Always 2. Please let it always be 2. I've been a park ranger for 7 years now. 7 years in the Greylock Wilderness Preserve, deep in the northern reaches where the mountains don't have names, and the trails fade into nothing after the first mile. People think they know what we do out here. They think we're here to protect them from bears, from cougars, from getting lost in the woods. That's what the brochures say. That's what we tell the families who come up here with their kids and their cameras looking for an authentic wilderness experience. But that's not the whole truth. It's not even half of it. The truth is something we don't talk about. Not to visitors, not to the new hires, who show up every spring with their fresh uniforms and their bright eyes. And certainly not to the people who make the budget decisions back in the state capitol. The truth is that we're not really here to protect you from the animals at all. We're here to protect you from something else. From things that don't belong in any field guide or nature documentary. From things that shouldn't exist but do anyway. Out there in the places where the map goes blank and the radio signals die. My name is Thatcher Klein, and I'm stationed at Tower 9, which is about as remote as you can get in this preserve. It's a 40-minute drive from the main visitor center on a dirt road that washes out every spring. And from there, it's another hour's hike to reach the actual tower. Most days, I don't see another soul. That's how I like it. Isolation has a way of clarifying things. Out here, away from the noise and the lights and the constant chatter of civilization, you start to notice things. Small things at first. The way the forest goes quiet in certain spots for no reason. The way your skin prickles when you're standing in a particular clearing, even though nothing looks wrong. The way shadows sometimes fall at angles that don't quite match the sun. When I first started, my supervisor was a man named Marlin. Marlin had been with the Park Service for 32 years, most of them spent right here in Greylock. He was the kind of ranger who knew every trail, every cave, every stream crossing by heart. He could read the forest like other people read books. And he was the one who first told me the real rules of working out here, not the official ones they teach you in training. The real ones. The ones that might actually keep you alive. It was my third day on the job. Marlin had taken me out on patrol, showing me the boundaries of my territory. Pointing out the landmarks I'd need to know. We'd hiked about 8 miles into the back country, following a trail that was barely more than a deer path. The afternoon light was starting to fade, casting long shadows through the pines. That's when Marlin stopped walking. Just stopped in the middle of the trail and stood there listening. I stood beside him, trying to figure out what he'd heard. But the forest was quiet. Too quiet, actually. No birds, no wind in the trees. Nothing. Marlin turned to me, and his face had this expression I couldn't quite read. Not fear, exactly. More like careful respect. The way you'd look at a loaded gun. He said, "Thatcher, there are some things you need to know about working out here, things that aren't in the manual." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. He looked around as if checking to make sure we were alone. Then he said, "You're going to see things that don't make sense, things that aren't supposed to be there. When that happens, you follow the protocols. You don't investigate. You don't try to understand. You just follow the protocols and you get out. Understood?" I wanted to ask him what kind of things he meant, but something in his tone told me not to push it. Not yet. So I just said yes. I understood, and we continued walking. But my mind was racing. What protocols was he talking about? I'd been through all the standard training. Wildlife encounters, search and rescue, emergency first aid. But nothing about mysterious things that weren't supposed to be there. Nothing about protocols for things that didn't make sense. We got back to the tower just as the sun was setting. Marlin made coffee on the little camp stove while I logged our patrol in the daily report. The tower was a simple structure. Just a single room raised 20 feet off the ground on metal stilts, with windows on all sides and a narrow staircase leading up. Basic furniture, a radio, some maps on the walls, nothing fancy. Marlin sat down across from me and pulled out a battered notebook from his pack. He opened it to a page near the middle and slid it across the table. The page was covered in handwritten notes, observations, dates. I scanned through them, trying to make sense of what I was reading. There were coordinates, descriptions of locations within the preserve. And next to each entry, there were notes. Strange notes. Heard whistling. No source visible. Found campsite. No tracks leading in or out. 3 hikers reported seeing lights moving through trees at 2 a.m. Checked area at dawn. Nothing there. I looked up at Marlin. He was watching me, his expression serious. "That's just this year," he said. "I've got 17 more notebooks like that one going back decades." He paused, took a sip of his coffee. "Look, Thatcher, I brought you on because you seem like you got a good head on your shoulders. You're not one of these young kids who thinks he knows everything. But there are things about this place you need to understand if you're going to last out here. Things the Park Service doesn't want to admit exist." I closed the notebook and pushed it back across the table. My hands felt cold. "What kind of things?" I asked. Marlin looked out the window at the darkening forest. "Things that live in the gaps," he said finally. "In the places people don't go. Things that have been here a lot longer than we have. We don't know what they are. Not really. We just know they're there. And we know that if people wander into the wrong places at the wrong times, bad things happen. That's why we have the protocols." He pulled out another piece of paper, this one typed and laminated. It looked official, like an actual Park Service document, but I'd never seen anything like it in training. At the top it said, "Supplementary Ranger Protocols, Restricted Access, Greylock Preserve." Below that was a list of instructions. Some of them seemed almost normal, others made no sense at all. If you encounter organized items in unnatural patterns, stacked stones, arranged branches, etc., mark location on GPS, do not disturb. Report immediately. If you hear whistling or singing with no visible source, leave area immediately. Do not respond or attempt to locate. If you find a trail or path not on official maps, do not follow it, even if it appears well maintained. I read through the whole list. There must have been 20 or 30 items, each one stranger than the last. When I finished, I looked up at Marlin. "This is real?" I asked. "This is official?" He shook his head. "Not official, but it's real. These protocols were put together by rangers over the years, passed down from one to the next. The Park Service doesn't acknowledge them because acknowledging them would mean acknowledging what's out there. And they can't do that. Can't let people know that there are places in this preserve where the normal rules don't apply. Where something else is in charge." I should have been skeptical. I should have thought Marlin was messing with me, some kind of hazing ritual for the new guy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was telling the truth. There was something in his voice, in the way he looked at that list. This wasn't a joke to him, this was survival. I asked him what would happen if I didn't follow the protocols. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You ever hear about Ranger Marcus Chen? Worked here about 5 years ago." I shook my head. Marlin's expression darkened. Marcus was a good ranger, smart, experienced, but he thought he knew better, thought the protocols were superstition. One night he radioed in that he'd found something unusual on patrol, some kind of structure back in Sector 7, and said he was going to check it out. That was the last anyone heard from him. "What happened?" I asked. Marlin shrugged, but there was weight behind it. "They found his truck 3 days later, parked at the trailhead, found his pack about a mile in. Found his radio another mile past that, smashed to pieces. But they never found Marcus. Search went on for 2 weeks. Dogs couldn't pick up a trail. It was like he just vanished into the woods. Official report called it a drowning. Said he must have fallen in the river. But there was no body, and Marcus knew those woods too well to fall in a river. I felt a chill run down my spine despite the warmth of the coffee in my hands. Marlin leaned forward. "I'm telling you this because I don't want the same thing to happen to you. You follow the protocols, Thatcher. You see something strange, you mark it, and you move on. You don't go looking for answers. The forest doesn't like questions." That night I lay in my bunk in the tower, unable to sleep. The wind moved through the pines outside, making them creak and sway. In the darkness, every sound seemed amplified. I kept thinking about what Marlin had told me about the protocols and the things in the gaps. Part of me still wanted to believe it was all just stories, folklore that the Rangers told each other to pass the time. But another part of me, a deeper part, knew better. I got up and walked to the window. The forest stretched out below me, vast and dark under the stars. Somewhere out there in all those miles of wilderness were things that didn't fit into the neat categories we'd made for the world. Things that couldn't be explained or cataloged or understood. Things that were simply there, existing in the spaces we'd forgotten about or never knew in the first place. And my job, my real job, was to stand between those things and the people who came here looking for beauty and peace and an escape from their ordinary lives. To make sure that their hikes and their campfires and their family photos never brought them close enough to see what was really watching them from the shadows. The next morning, Marlin was gone. He'd left a note saying he had to head back to the main station for a meeting with administration and that I should run my first solo patrol. He'd marked a route on the map, a simple loop through Sector 4 that should take about 6 hours. He'd circled certain spots on the map and written next to them, "Note landmarks. Be back before dark." I geared up and headed out just after sunrise, following the trail Marlin had marked. The morning was clear and cold, my breath fogging in the air. The preserve was beautiful in the early light, the kind of beauty that makes you understand why people want to escape into nature. Everything felt pristine, untouched, perfect. The first few hours of patrol were uneventful. I checked the regular waypoints, took notes on trail conditions, picked up some litter that hikers had left behind. Standard stuff. But as I moved deeper into the sector, I started to notice things, small things. A tree that had been stripped of bark in a perfect spiral pattern. The exposed wood already weathered gray. A circle of mushrooms growing in geometrically precise formation. A deer skull sitting upright on a rock, positioned as if it were looking down the trail. None of these things were dangerous by themselves, but there was something about them that felt wrong, intentional, like they'd been placed there by something that wanted to send a message. I remembered Marlin's protocol: mark it and move on. Don't investigate. So I took GPS coordinates, made notes in my log, and kept walking. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being observed, not watched exactly. Something deeper than that, something older. Around midday, I reached the farthest point of the loop, a small clearing where 2 trails intersected. This was one of the spots Marlin had circled on the map. I stopped to eat lunch, sitting on a fallen log at the edge of the clearing. The forest was quiet here. Not the peaceful quiet of a lazy afternoon, but an oppressive silence that felt like pressure against my eardrums. I was halfway through my sandwich when I heard it, whistling, clear and melodic, coming from somewhere in the trees to my north. It sounded almost human, like someone walking through the woods and whistling a tune. But there was something off about it. The notes were too perfect, the rhythm too steady, and it was moving and getting closer. I thought about the protocols. If you hear whistling or singing with no visible source, leave area immediately. My first instinct was to investigate, to call out and see if someone was out there. But Marlin's warning echoed in my mind. I packed up my lunch, shouldered my pack, and started walking fast. Not running, but close. The whistling continued, keeping pace with me. It was still somewhere off to the side, moving parallel to my path. I didn't look toward it. I kept my eyes on the trail ahead and kept moving. After about 20 minutes, the whistling stopped. The forest was quiet again, but not peaceful. Never peaceful. I didn't slow down until I reached the next waypoint, a stream crossing where the trail was well marked and open. Only then did I stop to catch my breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I pulled out my radio and called into the tower. Marlin answered immediately. I told him what had happened, keeping my voice steady. There was a pause. Then Marlin said, "You did the right thing, Thatcher. Mark the location and finish your patrol. We'll talk when you get back." I finished the loop as quickly as I could, and by the time I made it back to the tower, the sun was already low in the sky. Marlin was waiting for me, sitting at the table with his notebook spread out around him. I gave him my report, showed him the GPS coordinates where I'd heard the whistling. He nodded, making notes in his current log. "That's the third report from that area this month," he said. "We'll need to close that trail section. Make up some excuse about bear activity." I sat down across from him. "Marlin, what was that out there? What was following me?" He looked up from his notes. "I don't know," he said. "And that's the truth, Thatcher. Nobody knows. We just know that certain things happen in certain places, and when they do, you get out. Maybe it's territorial. Maybe it's curious. Maybe it's something else entirely. But it doesn't matter what it is. What matters is that you survived your first encounter with it, and you did it by following the protocols." He closed his notebook and looked at me seriously. "You're going to have more encounters like that, probably a lot of them. And each time it's going to be tempting to try to understand, to investigate, to prove to yourself that there's a rational explanation. But you can't give in to that temptation. The forest doesn't care about your curiosity. It doesn't care about science or logic or any of the tools we use to make sense of the world. Out there in those deep places, different rules apply. And the only way to survive is to respect that." That night I updated my own log, writing down everything that had happened on the patrol. The stripped tree, the mushroom circle, the positioned skull, the whistling that followed me through the woods. I added my observations to the long chain of strange encounters that rangers before me had documented, and I understood finally what my real job was. Not to explain these things, not to solve them, or stop them, or even understand them, just to witness them. To mark where they happened and warn others away, to stand at the boundary between the world people knew and the world they couldn't know, and make sure that boundary held. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm of sorts. I'd go out on patrol, follow the marked routes, check the waypoints. Most days were normal, but every few patrols I'd encounter something that didn't fit. A campsite that appeared overnight in an area close to camping, pristine and empty, with no sign of anyone arriving or leaving. Trees that had fallen across the trail in patterns too deliberate to be natural. Strange sounds in the distance that stopped the moment I tried to pinpoint their location. Each time I followed the protocols, marked the coordinates, reported back, moved on, and each time I felt like I understood a little less about where I was working. Marlin continued my education in the unwritten rules of the preserve. He showed me the places marked in red on the old maps, areas that weren't officially closed, but that experienced rangers knew to avoid. He taught me how to read the signs that something was wrong with the section of forest. Subtle indicators that most people would never notice. A sudden change in temperature. Birds congregating in unusual numbers. The smell of ozone before a storm that never came. These were the red flags, he said. The warnings that you were approaching somewhere you shouldn't be. One evening in early October, Marlin and I were reviewing the week's reports when the radio crackled to life. It was the main station calling for any rangers in the northern sectors. A hiker had gone missing, last seen on the Three Peaks Trail yesterday afternoon, failed to return to the trailhead. Family had reported it this morning. They were organizing a search party and needed all available personnel. Marlin looked at me. "You up for this?" I nodded. I'd assisted on a search and rescue operation during training, but never out here, never in Greylock. We grabbed our gear and headed out. By the time we reached the staging area at the Three Peaks trailhead, there were already a dozen people there. Rangers from other sectors, volunteer search teams, a couple of sheriff's deputies. The missing hiker was a woman named Nola Penn, 34 years old, experienced backpacker. She'd told her family she was doing a day hike and would be back before sunset. When she didn't return, they waited until morning before calling it in. Standard procedure, but it meant she'd been out there alone for at least 24 hours. And the search coordinator, a senior ranger named Briggs, briefed us on the plan. We'd split into teams, each covering a section of the trail system. Nola's car was still at the trailhead, so we knew her general starting point. The Three Peaks trail was popular, well-marked. If she'd stayed on the trail, we'd find her quickly. But if she'd wandered off into the backcountry, Briggs didn't need to finish that sentence. Marlin and I were assigned to search Sector 6, a region I hadn't patrolled yet. It bordered some of the red-marked areas on the old maps. As we geared up, Marlin pulled me aside. "Listen," he said quietly. "If we find her and if something's happened, you let me handle it. You understand?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure I did understand. What did he mean, if something's happened? But there wasn't time to ask. We had to get moving. We started up the trail, calling Nola's name every few minutes. The day was overcast, threatening rain. The forest felt close and oppressive. We searched for hours, covering miles of trails and checking every side path, every clearing, every spot where someone might have stopped to rest or gotten turned around. It was late afternoon when we found the first sign, not of Nola directly, but of something wrong. We'd left the main trail to check a promising lead, following what looked like fresh footprints into a dense grove of pines. The footprints led to a small clearing, and then they just stopped, not faded away gradually, not scattered in different directions. They just ended in the middle of the clearing, as if Nola had been lifted straight up into the air. Marlin examined the ground carefully, walking in a slow circle around the spot where the tracks ended. His face was grim. "This isn't good," he said. I looked around the clearing. The trees formed an almost perfect circle around us. In the center was a ring of stones arranged in a pattern that was definitely not natural. I felt my skin prickle. "Marlin," I said, pointing at the stones. He looked and his expression darkened. "We need to report this," he said. "And then we need to get out of here." But before we could move, we heard something, a voice, faint and distant, calling for help. It was coming from deeper in the woods beyond the clearing. Marlin grabbed my arm. "No," he said. "That's not her." I stared at him. "How do you know?" "We have to check." "That is not her," he repeated, his grip tightening. "Listen to me, Thatcher. That is not a human voice calling for help. It's something else, something using that sound to lure us in. We leave now." The voice called again, closer this time. It sounded exactly like a woman in distress, exactly like what you'd expect to hear if someone was lost and scared in the woods. But there was something underneath it, something that didn't quite fit, a hollowness, an echo where there shouldn't be one. Marlin pulled me back towards the trail. We moved quickly, not quite running, but close. The voice followed us for a while, calling out, begging for help. It took every ounce of willpower I had not to turn around, not to go back and look. The voice was so convincing, so desperate. But Marlin had been right before, and I trusted his judgment. Now, whatever that was, it wasn't Nola Penn. We made it back to the main trail and radioed in our report. Told the search coordinator about the footprints, the clearing, the arranged stones. We didn't mention the voice, Briggs said he'd redirect other search teams to that area, told us to take a break, grab some water. We're sitting at one of the waypoints, catching our breath, when another call came through on the radio. They'd found something. A piece of clothing identified as belonging to Nola. It was about a mile east of where we'd been searching near the edge of Sector 7. All teams were being redirected to that location, Sector 7. I remembered what Marlin had told me during my first week. That was where Ranger Marcus Chen had disappeared, where he'd found something unusual and gone to investigate and never came back. Marlin and I exchanged a look. Neither of us said anything, but we both understood. This wasn't going to end well. We joined up with the other search teams at the new location. The piece of clothing, a torn sleeve from Nola's jacket, had been found hanging from a branch about 6 feet off the ground. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood, nothing else. Just the sleeve fluttering in the breeze like a flag or a marker. The search coordinator called for a wider sweep of the area. We spread out in a line, maybe 20 yards between each person, and started moving through the forest. The underbrush was thick here, making it slow going. I could hear the other searchers calling out, their voices muffled by the trees. Marlin was to my right, methodically checking every fallen log, every dense thicket. The light was starting to fade. We had maybe an hour before it would be too dark to continue safely. That's when I saw it. Ahead of me, maybe 30 yards into the trees, there was a structure. Not a natural formation, something built. It looked like a small cabin or shelter made from weathered wood that blended into the surrounding forest. I couldn't tell how long it had been there. Could have been years. Could have been decades. I called out to Marlin. He came over, saw what I was looking at, and his face went pale. "We need to call this in," he said. "Right now." I pulled out my radio, but before I could key it, we heard a sound from inside the structure. A moan, low and pained human. "Someone's in there," I said. Marlin grabbed my arm again. "Thatcher, don't..." But I was already moving toward the structure. If Nola was in there, if she was hurt, we couldn't just wait. Every second could matter. I heard Marlin curse behind me, then follow. We approached carefully, hands on our flashlights. The structure was smaller than I'd thought, barely big enough for one person to sit inside. It had no door, just an opening facing away from us. I circled around, Marlin right behind me until we could see inside. It was empty. Completely empty. No Nola, no gear, nothing that would have made that sound. Just bare earth and a weathered wood. I felt a chill run through me. The moan came again, and this time I realized it wasn't coming from inside the structure. It was coming from underneath it. Marlin pulled me back. "We're leaving," he said firmly. "Right now." This time I didn't argue. We backed away from the structure, and as we did, I noticed something carved into the wood near the opening. Symbols of some kind worn smooth by time and weather. They looked almost like letters, but not quite, arranged in patterns that hurt to look at too long. We returned to the search line and reported what we'd found. The coordinator decided to call off the search for the night. It was too dark, too dangerous to continue. We'd resume at first light, but I could tell from the way Briggs said it that he didn't expect to find Nola alive. None of us did. That night back at the tower, Marlin was quiet. He sat at the table with a cup of coffee that went cold while he stared at his notebooks. Finally, he said, "That structure, it's been there a long time. I've seen it before, years ago, when I first started working this sector." "What is it?" I asked. He shook his head. "I don't know. Nobody knows. It just appears sometimes in different parts of the forest, never in the same place twice. When it shows up, someone usually goes missing. Not always right away. Sometimes it takes weeks, but it happens. We should tell someone." I said, The search coordinator, the sheriff, they need to know. Know what? Marlin interrupted. That there's a mysterious cabin that appears and disappears. That we think it's connected to missing hikers, but we have no evidence and no explanation. They'd think we were crazy. And even if they believed us, what would they do? How do you fight something you can't understand? He was right, and I knew it. But it felt wrong to just sit here knowing what we knew while Nola was out there somewhere. If she was still out there at all. The search resumed the next morning. Fresh teams arrived, including volunteers from neighboring counties and a tracking dog unit. They covered the area around the structure and around the clearing where we'd found the arranged stones. Around every spot where we'd found any trace of Nola. They found nothing else. No more clothing, no gear, no tracks. It was like she'd simply vanished into thin air. After 3 days, the search was officially called off. Nola Penn was declared missing, presumed dead. The official report would say she likely suffered an accident and succumbed to exposure. And her body would eventually be found by other hikers or remain hidden in the vast wilderness. That was the story. That was what they'd tell her family. But Marlin and I knew better. We'd seen the arranged stones, the impossible structure, the signs that something else had been involved, something that didn't fit into the neat categories of accidents and exposure. And we knew with a sick certainty that we'd probably never find out what really happened to Nola Penn. She'd joined the list of people who'd walked into these woods and never walked out. People who'd disappeared into the gaps, into the places where the normal rules didn't apply. The preserve stayed open. The trails stayed open. Life went on. Hikers came and went, unaware that every step they took might be watched by something they couldn't see or understand. And Marlin and I went back to our patrols, following our routes, marking our coordinates, following the protocols. Witnesses to mysteries we couldn't solve. Guardians of boundaries we couldn't explain. One evening, a few weeks after the search had ended, I asked Marlin how he did it. How he kept coming back here. Kept working in these woods, knowing what he knew. He thought about it for a long time. Then he said, "Someone has to stand between the people who come here looking for peace and the things that wait in the dark places. Someone has to mark the boundaries and know the warnings and try to keep people safe, even if we can't save them all. It's not much, but it's what we can do." He paused, looking out at the darkening forest. And maybe somewhere deep down, I believe that if we do our job right, if we respect the forest and follow the protocols and keep the balance, maybe it respects us back. Maybe it lets us walk these trails and do our work because we're not trying to conquer it or understand it. We're just trying to coexist. I didn't know if I believed that, but I understood what he meant. Out here in the deep wilderness, you learned humility. You learned that there were forces greater than yourself, older than you, that operated by rules you'd never comprehend. And you learned that the best you could do was stay alert, trust your instincts, and respect the boundaries between the known and the unknown. That night, I added Nola Penn's name to my log, wrote down the coordinates where we'd found her tracks, where we'd found the structure, where everything had gone wrong. Another entry in the long record of things that happened in Greylock that couldn't be explained, another mystery that would never be solved. And I understood finally what my predecessor, Marcus Chen, must have felt when he decided to investigate instead of following the protocols. That terrible curiosity, that need to know. But I also understood why that decision had cost him everything. Winter came to Greylock hard and fast that year. By November, snow had already closed most of the higher elevation trails, and the few visitors who still came were experienced winter hikers who knew what they were getting into. The preserve got quieter, more isolated. In some ways, that made the job easier. Fewer people meant fewer potential incidents, but it also meant longer stretches alone, more time to think about what I'd seen, what I couldn't explain. The forest felt different in winter, more stark, more honest maybe. The leaves were gone from the trees, and you could see farther into the woods. But somehow that didn't make you feel safer. If anything, it made you feel more exposed. Marlin had taken a few weeks off for the holidays visiting family down in the lowland. That left me as the senior ranger at Tower 9, responsible for the northern sectors. The Park Service had sent up a rookie to help with the winter patrols, a young guy named Ephra Hollis, who'd just finished his training. Ephra was enthusiastic, eager to prove himself. He reminded me of how I'd been when I first arrived. That optimism, that confidence, that you understood how the world worked. I wondered how long it would take before Greylock showed him otherwise. I'd decided not to tell Ephra about the protocols right away. Marlin and I had discussed it before he left. Sometimes it was better to let the new rangers find their footing first, get comfortable with the regular work before introducing them to the irregular parts. Besides, the winter months tended to be quieter. Whatever was out there in the forest, it seemed less active when the snow came. Not gone, never gone, but dormant, maybe waiting. Ephra and I fell into a routine. We'd alternate patrols, checking the winter trails, looking for signs of illegal activity, making sure the few winter campers were following regulations. Routine stuff. Boring, even. But boring was good. Boring meant nobody was getting hurt. It was mid-December when things started getting strange again. Ephra came back from a patrol with an odd story. He'd been checking one of the northern trails up near the boundary with Sector 8 when he'd found footprints in the snow, human footprints barefoot leading from the trail into the woods. Barefoot, I asked. You sure? Ephra nodded. No mistake. Clear prints, no socks, no boots, just bare feet in the snow. I followed them for a bit, but they went into some really dense undergrowth, and I lost the trail. He paused. Who the hell walks around barefoot in December? I felt that familiar chill, the one I'd come to associate with things that didn't fit. Show me where, I said. We geared up and headed out, following Ephra's route. It took us about 2 hours to reach the spot where he'd found the prints. The snow had been falling on and off, but the tracks were still visible, partially filled in, but clear enough to see. Ephra was right. They were barefoot prints, adult-sized, walking at a normal pace, not running, not stumbling, just walking steadily into the forest. I knelt down and examined them more closely. The prints were deep, which suggested the person making them had been heavy or pressing down hard. But there was something else. The snow around each footprint had melted slightly, creating a small rim of ice. That didn't make sense. The temperature was well below freezing. Snow shouldn't be melting around footprints. We need to follow these, Ephra said. I stood up, brushing snow off my knees. No, I said. We marked the location and reported. Ephra frowned. But someone's out there barefoot in the snow. They could be in trouble. Hypothermia, frostbite. If they were in trouble, they wouldn't be making prints this steady, I said. And they definitely wouldn't be melting the snow around their feet. I pulled out my GPS and marked the coordinates. We report this and let the senior staff decide how to handle it. Ephra looked like he wanted to argue, but something in my tone must have convinced him. We hiked back to the tower, and I filed the report. The response came back quickly. Document and monitor. Do not pursue. I could tell Ephra was frustrated. He thought we were abandoning someone who needed help, but I knew better. Those footprints weren't made by someone who needed help. They were made by something else, something that wanted us to follow. That night, I showed Ephra the protocols for the first time. He read through them, his expression shifting from skepticism to confusion to something that might have been fear. This is real? He asked when he finished. These are actual Park Service protocols. Not official, I said, but real. Rangers had been documenting strange occurrences in Greylock for decades. These protocols are based on what we've learned, what works, and what doesn't. Ephra was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Those footprints today, you think they were what? Something not human." "I think they were something that wanted to look human enough to make us curious," I said. "Something that knew we'd want to investigate." Over the next few days, more reports came in. Another ranger found a set of child-sized handprints pressed into the snow on a tree trunk about 8 feet off the ground. A winter hiker reported hearing singing coming from an area where no one else was visible. The maintenance crew found one of our trail markers relocated 2 miles from where it should have been, planted perfectly in the frozen ground. Each incident by itself could have been explained away. Vandalism, hoaxers, natural phenomena. But taken together, they formed a pattern. Something was active in the preserve, something that was getting bolder. The senior staff decided to bring in outside help. A local named Silas Dreer, who styled himself as a botanist but was known around the area for his knowledge of the region's folklore and history. Marlin had mentioned Silas before, said he'd consulted with him on a few occasions when things got particularly strange. Silas showed up at the tower on a gray afternoon in late December, driving a battered truck and carrying a worn leather bag. He was older, maybe 60, with long gray hair tied back and weathered features that suggested a lot of time spent outdoors. His handshake was firm, his eyes sharp and assessing. "Marlin tells me you've been having some unusual activity," Silas said after we'd settled in with coffee. I briefed him on the incidents, showed him the logs and coordinates. He listened carefully, occasionally making notes in a small journal. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, staring at the map where I'd marked all the recent occurrences. "These locations," he said finally, "they form a pattern. See?" He traced his finger across the map, connecting the dots. "They're following the old boundary lines." "What boundary lines?" Ephra asked. Silas looked at him. Before this was a preserve, before it was settled by Europeans, this land belonged to the indigenous peoples. They had their own understanding of this place, their own relationships with what lived here, and they had boundaries, places they didn't go, places that were set aside. He tapped the map. "Your recent incidents are all happening along those old boundaries. Something's testing them." "Testing them how?" I asked. "Trying to see how much it can push before someone pushes back." Silas said, "The balance here is delicate. Always has been. For a long time, the Park Service has maintained that balance without really understanding it, following protocols that were based on indigenous knowledge, even if they didn't realize it." But lately he trailed off, frowning. "Lately there's been pressure to open up more of the preserve, bring in more visitors, develop more trails, push into areas that have been left alone for good reason." I thought about the recent planning meetings I had heard about. The talk of expanding the trail system into the eastern sectors, areas that had always been marked as too remote, too difficult, red-marked areas on the old maps. "What happens if those boundaries break down?" Ephra asked. Silas met his gaze. "Then the things that have been contained here, the things that have been kept in balance will spread, and they won't stop at the preserved boundaries. They'll move into the surrounding areas, into the towns, into places where people aren't prepared to deal with them." The room was quiet, except for the wind outside. Finally, I said, "What do we do?" Silas opened his leather bag and pulled out several items. Small bundles of dried herbs, small stones carved with symbols, a few pieces of paper covered in writing I couldn't read. "We reinforce the boundaries," he said the old way. "I'll show you what needs to be done. But you need to understand this is only a temporary solution. The real problem is that people are forgetting. forgetting why these places were set aside, why certain areas were left alone. As long as that forgetting continues, the boundaries will keep weakening. Over the next several days, Silas taught Ephra and me the old protocols. Not the ones written in the ranger logs, but the older ones. The ones that predated the Park Service, that went back generations. We learned how to mark boundaries, how to leave offerings, how to show respect to the things that lived in the deep places. It felt strange, almost superstitious, leaving small bundles of tobacco and sage at certain spots, arranging stones in specific patterns. But Silas was patient, explaining that it wasn't about belief or ritual. It was about communication, about sending signals that we understood the rules, that we weren't trying to push into places we didn't belong. As we worked, Silas told us stories about the rangers who'd worked here before, the ones who'd learned these protocols the hard way, about the incidents that had happened when people ignored the warnings. He told us about a logging operation back in the 1970s that had tried to clear-cut a section of the forest despite local protests. The first tree they cut down had fallen wrong, killing the foreman. The second tree had crushed their equipment, and by the third day, all the workers had refused to continue. The company had abandoned the project, leaving the equipment to rust in the forest. It was still out there, he said, it being slowly reclaimed, kicking by the woods. One evening, we were working on reinforcing a boundary marker near Sector 8 when Ephra asked Silas a question I'd been wondering about too. What are they? The things out here? What are we actually dealing with? Silas was quiet for a long moment, arranging stones in a careful pattern. That's the wrong question, he said finally. The question isn't what they are. The question is why they're here. And the answer is that they've always been here, long before humans came to this continent, long before we built our cities and our roads and our parks. They're part of this place, part of the deep fabric of it. We're the newcomers. We're the ones who don't belong, at least not in the way we think we do, but they're dangerous. Ephra said, people disappear. People die sometimes. Silas agreed. But think about how many people walk these trails every year. Thousands. Tens of thousands. And how many disappear? A handful. Maybe less than would die from regular hiking accidents, from falls and exposure and bad luck. Whatever's out here, it's not trying to kill everyone who enters. It's selective. It takes the ones who push too far, who ignore the warnings, who treat the forest like it's here for their entertainment. It's not malicious. It's territorial. There's a difference. I thought about Nola Penn, about Marcus Chen, about all the names in the logs. Had they pushed too far? Had they ignored warnings they didn't even know they were receiving? Or had they just been unlucky in the wrong place at the wrong time? Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe the lesson was simpler than that. Respect the forest. Follow the protocols. Stay within the boundaries. Simple rules, but so hard to follow in a world that taught us we could go anywhere, do anything, conquer any wilderness. We finished our work as the sun was setting, painting the snow-covered forest in shades of orange and red. The boundary markers were in place. The protocols followed. Silas said it should hold for a while, give us some breathing room, but he warned us that it was only temporary. Unless the Park Service changed its expansion plans, unless people started remembering why these boundaries existed, we'd be back here again. And next time, the things in the forest might not be so patient. January came in cold and clear. The work Silas had done seemed to help. The strange incidents decreased, and the preserve settled into the quiet rhythm of deep winter. Ephra had adapted well to his new understanding of the job. He'd stopped asking questions that didn't have answers and started focusing on the practical work of maintaining boundaries and following protocols. We made a good team, but I could tell the knowledge weighed on him, the same way it weighed on me. There was a loneliness to it, knowing things that most people couldn't know, seeing patterns that others couldn't see. Marlin came back from his leave in mid-January, and I briefed him on everything that had happened. He listened carefully, asked good questions, seemed satisfied with how Ephra and I had handled things, but I noticed he looked older somehow, more tired. Whatever demons he carried from his 3 decades of work in Greylock, they were starting to show. One evening, just the 2 of us in the tower, he told me he was thinking about retiring. "I've been at this a long time, Thatcher," he said. "Maybe too long. There comes a point where the forest starts to feel like it's inside you, like you can't tell anymore where it ends and you begin. I think I'm getting close to that point." I didn't know what to say. The thought of doing this job without Marlin's guidance was unsettling. But I understood there was a cost to being a witness to these things, to carrying this knowledge. Eventually, it wore you down. He seemed to read my thoughts. "You'll be fine," he said. "You got good instincts, and you know when to listen to them. That's rarer than you think. And you've got Ephra. He's green, but he'll learn. The forest will teach him, same as it taught you, same as it taught me." "What about the next person?" I asked. "When we eventually leave, when it's someone else's turn to work these sectors, how do we pass this on?" Marlin smiled, a tired smile. "The same way it was passed to us. The same way it's been passed down for generations. Through the logs, through the stories, through the protocols. The forest makes sure that the people who need to know will find out. It has a way of choosing its guardians." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Marlin had said, about the forest choosing its guardians, about the weight of being chosen. I got up and walked to the window, looking out at the moonlit snow. That's when I saw them. Lights moving through the trees. 3 of them, maybe 4, bobbing slowly through the forest about a mile out. They were too far away to tell what they were. Flashlights, maybe, if there were hikers out there. But who would be hiking at 3 o'clock in the morning in the middle of winter? I grabbed my radio and called it in. Marlin woke up immediately and joined me at the window. We watched the lights for a few minutes. They were moving in a pattern, circling something, coming together, and then separating again. "Marlin," I said quietly, "what are we looking at?" He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "I don't know. Oh, and I think that's the only honest answer I can give you." We watched until the lights disappeared into the dense forest. Neither of us went back to sleep that night. In the morning, we debated whether to investigate. The lights had been in Sector 7, near where Nola Penn had disappeared, near where the structure had appeared. Part of me wanted to go look to finally get some answers, but I knew that was the same impulse that had gotten Marcus Chen killed. The protocols were clear. Unexplained lights in the forest. You mark the location and report. You don't investigate. But someone had to investigate eventually, didn't they? Someone had to actually go into those red-marked areas, those places we'd been avoiding, and find out what was really happening. How else would we ever understand what we were dealing with? I mentioned this to Marlin over breakfast. He set down his coffee cup and looked at me seriously. "You're thinking about breaking protocol," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm thinking that following protocol means we never get answers." I said, "We just document mysteries and hope they don't get worse." "But what if they do get worse? What if what Silas said is true and the boundaries are weakening? Don't we have a responsibility to do more than just mark coordinates?" Marlin was quiet. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy. "I had this exact conversation with Marcus Chen 3 days before he disappeared. He said almost the same things you're saying now." The words hit me like cold water. I sat back. The parallel suddenly clear. Was I making the same mistake Marcus had made? Was I letting curiosity override caution? But Marcus was right, I said quietly, wasn't he? We do need answers. Maybe, Marlin said. But we also need people alive to use those answers. Dead rangers can't protect anyone. The conversation ended there, but the question stayed with me. Over the next few weeks, I found myself thinking about it more and more, looking at the red marks on the old maps, at the coordinates where strange things had happened, wondering what was really out there, what we were really protecting people from, and whether our protection was enough. In early February, we got a call from Sheriff Harlan Quaid. There had been incidents in the town closest to the preserve, about 15 miles from our location. Livestock going missing, strange tracks found in yards, a couple of residents reporting seeing figures in the woods at night that didn't move like animals or people. Your boss says you're the expert on weird in the forest, Quaid said when he came up to the tower. So I'm asking for your expert opinion. What the hell is going on? I showed him the logs, the patterns, the protocols, explained as much as I could without sounding completely insane. Quaid listened, his expression skeptical, but not dismissive. He'd been a sheriff in this county for 20 years. He'd seen things that didn't fit into neat categories. So what you're telling me, he said when I finished, is that there's something in the preserve that's starting to push outside its normal boundaries, and your solution is to leave it alone and hope it goes back. Put that way, it sounded absurd, but I didn't have a better answer. The boundaries have been maintained for a long time, I said. As long as we respect them, things stay balanced. The problem is that the Park Service is planning to expand into areas that have been left alone. If they do that, then this thing, whatever it is going to push back harder, Quaid finished. And my town is going to be in the middle of it. He stood up, paced to the window. I can't sell this to my department. I can't tell them there's a forest monster that's mad about trail expansion. But I also can't ignore what's happening. What are you going to do, I asked. He turned back to me. What I always do, investigate, follow the evidence, try to keep people safe. Same as you, he paused. But I'm going to need your help. You know this preserve better than anyone. You know where the danger spots are. If I'm going to track down whatever's causing problems, I need you to guide me. I looked at Marlin. He shook his head slightly. Don't do it, his expression said. But I thought about the town, about the people living there who didn't know what was in these woods, about my responsibility not just to document mysteries, but to actually protect people. Well, I'll help, I said. But we do it my way. We follow the protocols, and if I say we need to back off, we back off. No arguments. Quaid considered this, then nodded. Deal. We planned the investigation for the following week, giving me time to study the patterns and figure out the safest approach. Marlin made his disapproval clear, but he didn't try to stop me. Just told me to be careful, to remember what happened to Marcus, to remember that some mysteries were dangerous to solve. The night before the investigation, I couldn't sleep again. I kept thinking about all the warnings I'd received, all the protocols I'd learned, all the evidence that suggested investigating was a mistake. But I also thought about Nola Penn, about the fear she must have felt in those final moments, about all the people whose names filled the logs who disappeared without explanation. Didn't they deserve answers? Didn't their families deserve closure? The morning came cold and bright. Quaid arrived early with one of his deputies, a young woman named Torres. We geared up and reviewed the plan. We'd start at the location where the lights had been seen, work our way toward the old boundary markers and see what we could find. Simple and careful. Follow the protocols. Respect the boundaries. As we prepared to leave, Marlin pulled me aside one last time. Thatcher, he said, if something feels wrong, if you get that feeling in your gut that you need to leave, you leave. You don't wait You don't try to be brave, you just get out. Promise me. I promise, I said. And I meant it. We set out into the forest, following the trails toward Sector 7. The snow crunched under our boots, the only sound in the still air. The forest was quiet, a deep winter quiet that felt almost sacred. For the first few hours, everything was normal. We found some tracks, deer and rabbit, nothing unusual. Found the remnants of an old campsite, long abandoned. Found the boundary markers Silas had placed still intact. And then around midday, we found something else, a path, not on any map, not marked on any trail sign, but clearly a path worn smooth by use, winding deeper into the forest. It led toward one of the red-marked areas, towards places rangers had been avoiding for decades. I felt that familiar chill, that warning in my gut. But Quaid was already moving toward the path, following the signs of use. "This is fresh," he said, examining the ground. "Something's been using this path regularly recently." I looked at the path, at the way it seemed to almost invite us in. Remembered the protocols. If you find a trail or path not on official maps, do not follow it, even if it appears well maintained. "We don't go down there," I said. Quaid looked at me. "This could be where your missing hikers ended up. This could be answers, or it could be a trap." I said, "The forest does this, creates things that look like they make sense, like they're safe to investigate, but they're not." We stood there at the entrance to the unmarked path, at the boundary between the known and unknown. Behind me was safety, the protocols, the proven ways of staying alive in Greylock. Ahead was the mystery, the possibility of answers, and the certainty of danger. I thought about Marcus Chin, about Nola Penn, about all the rangers who'd walked into the forest and never come back. And I thought about what Silas had said, about how the forest chooses its guardians, about how some mysteries were meant to remain unsolved. Quaid was waiting for my decision. Torres stood beside him, hand on her radio, ready to follow whatever lead I gave, and I realized that this was the moment Marlon had been warning me about from the beginning, the moment when curiosity and responsibility collided, the moment when I had to choose between answers and survival. The wind picked up, moving through the pines with a sound almost like whispering, almost like voices calling from somewhere down that unmarked path, calling us to follow. I took a step back. "We're leaving," I said. Quaid started to protest, but I cut him off. "I promised you I'd guide you. And I promised you we'd follow protocol. The protocol's clear. We don't go down unmarked paths, not today, not ever." For a moment, I thought he might ignore me. Might go down that path anyway. But then he nodded, stepping back. "Your call," he said. We turned and headed back the way we'd come, leaving the unmarked path behind. As we walked, I felt something watching us from that direction. Not threatening exactly, just observing, making note of our decision, recording which side of the boundary we'd chosen to stay on. That night, back at the tower, Marlon asked me what I'd found. I told him about the path, about the choice I'd made. He nodded slowly, something like relief crossing his face. "You did the right thing," he said. "Not the easy thing, but the right thing." "We didn't get any answers, though," I said. "Didn't help the sheriff, didn't solve any mysteries." "No," Marlon agreed. "But you all made it back alive. That's the answer that matters." He paused. "There's an old saying about this forest. The rangers who last longest aren't the ones who solve the most mysteries. They're the ones who learn to live with not knowing." I thought about that, about the logs full of unexplained incidents, decades of mysteries carefully documented but never solved, about all the rangers who'd worked these sectors, maintaining boundaries they didn't fully understand, following protocols whose origins were lost to time. We were witnesses, I realized, not investigators, not heroes, just witnesses recording what happened, warning others away, standing at the boundary between the known and unknown. Not because we'd been ordered to, but because someone had to. Because the alternative, letting people wander blindly into danger, was worse than carrying the weight of these mysteries. I've been a ranger for 7 years now. 7 years of patrols and protocols, of strange encounters and unexplained incidents. 7 years of standing at that boundary. Marlin retired last spring. Ephra moved up to a different station. New rangers come through, bright-eyed and eager, and I teach them what I was taught. Not everything at first. You have to earn that knowledge, prove you can handle it. But eventually, when they're ready, I show them the logs, the protocols, the old maps with their red marks, and I tell them what I was told. This forest is older than we are, deeper than we are. There are things here that we don't understand and probably never will. Our job isn't to solve those mysteries. Our job is to witness them, to mark the boundaries, and to keep people from crossing lines they don't even know exist. Some of them listen. Some of them think they know better. And some of them disappear, adding new names to the logs, new mysteries for the next generation to document. The preserve stays open. The trails stay open. People come here seeking beauty and peace, and most of them find it. They take their pictures and have their adventures and go home with stories about the majestic wilderness. They never know what's watching from the deep places. They never see the things that move in the shadows just beyond the trail. And maybe that's for the best. Maybe the innocence, the not knowing, is what keeps them safe. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone in the tower, I think about that unmarked path, about where it leads, about what answers might wait in those red-marked places we've been avoiding all these years. And I understand why Marcus Chen made the choice he made, why Nola Penn might have followed something into the woods despite the warnings she probably felt but didn't understand. The forest calls to you out here, not with sound exactly, with something deeper, with that terrible curiosity that humans need to know, to understand, to shine light into dark places. Resisting that call is the hardest part of this job. Harder than the isolation, harder than the long patrols, harder than seeing things that don't make sense and documenting them without trying to explain them. Last week, I saw the lights again, same as before, moving through the trees in the early morning dark. I marked the coordinates, reported them, followed protocol. But I also stood at the window and watched them for a long time. Those strange lights dancing in the forest. And part of me wanted to follow. Part of me still wants to know what's really out there. But I won't because Marlin was right. The rangers who last longest aren't the ones who solve the mysteries. They're the ones who learn to live with not knowing. And because someone has to stand here at the boundary, maintaining the balance, protecting people from threats they can't see. Not the bears, not the cougars, not the ordinary dangers of the wilderness. The other things, the things in the gaps, the things that have been here longer than we have and will be here long after we're gone. That's what we're really protecting you from. And if we're doing our job right, you'll never know it. You'll walk these trails and enjoy this forest and never realize how close you came to crossing a boundary that shouldn't be crossed. You'll go home safe and we'll add another day to the logs, another successful patrol, another day of maintaining the balance. That's the job. That's what we do. We're park rangers. We're not here to protect you from animals. We're here to protect you from everything else and to protect ourselves from our own curiosity, from our own need to know. Because out here in these deep woods, some questions are better left unasked. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Some boundaries are better left uncrossed. The forest knows its secrets, and it intends to keep them.